time that's needed. Integrate destination thinking with tourism and tourists at the center to place-based thinking, which also puts residents and local communities at the center. Destinations can and really must be places where people live, work, play, study, and visit, and we need to manage them accordingly. So destinations that develop products and experiences for visitors without thinking about the broader role of place and the needs of local communities may in fact not be contributing well to a thriving place, despite the obvious benefits that tourism can bring. Taking part in placemaking also enables tourism to have a seat at the table with public and private sector, to be involved in infrastructure and planning and retail, culture and sports, environmental protection, citizen well-being. I think this is what many destination management organizations have been longing for, to have a seat at the table, to be on the agenda, and to be taken seriously as a driver in these discussions. This offers many new opportunities for management. This doesn't mean that destinations shouldn't retain their core expertise or the responsibilities beyond managing tourism and marketing a destination, but I think there's a real opportunity to work within this paradigm. For destinations, this means taking their rightful place at the table for wider placemaking, planning, and development. Destinations are increasingly considering how the visitor economy can support those placemaking goals, but it also means taking a larger role in addressing the big issues of our time. From a COVID perspective, you think immediately about health and safety, but also things like the climate crisis and the important conversations we're having globally about race, diversity, and inclusion. Practically speaking, this means we need to reframe success so that communities have a seat at the table, creating a shared vision and agenda for their destination, where success is reframed according to different indicators beyond the typical economic ones of arrivals, contribution to GDP, incorporating things like equitable benefits, quality of life, and impact on resources and biodiversity. Businesses need to recognize and find their place within this shared agenda too. Companies are starting to recognize increasingly both the risks and opportunities inherent in their role within the destination ecosystem. And customers are increasingly telling them, and the trends, we see them accelerating all the time, that changes are really needed to ensure a fair and level playing field and to create a better, more diverse, more fair, lower footprint, and ultimately higher quality tourism experience. So to close, because I'm sure I'm just about out of time, destinations of the future will do the following: contribute to a place-based vision born from community engagement and representation, align across sectors for a shared agenda, have smarter data, not just more data, but smarter data to track performance in these key impact areas, have access to new funding, mix of public and private impact investment and conservation finance, not solely dependent on tourism numbers anymore. Create entirely new structures that allow for better collaboration with the community and with each other. And most importantly, have better key performance indicators linked to the above, reflecting the broader positive and negative impacts and costs and benefits of visitors on the product, people, and the place. I think that all of this presents a real opportunity to, in fact, build back better, for public and private sector to be more meaningful partners to communities, to be good destination stewards. And by forging a new and more meaningful relationship, we can create a win-win situation. And we can start answering that question about why we want tourism with answers that are best for communities and for our environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing with us such a valuable guiding principles, step-by-step procedures, which is really valuable. Thank you so much. And I would like to invite Ms. Caroline to share with us reliable information from Euromonitor regarding the effects of the COVID pandemic on European tourism industry. Welcome, Caroline.
Great, thank you, Martina. And obviously, Jeremy is a great person to follow, and I'm pleased to say that I will not be talking about visitor arrivals. So I'm delighted to present our latest research that we have on the impact of coronavirus on European tourism. And so what we'll do is quickly look at the latest performance data that we have. And then I have some brand new consumer survey research, which is really interesting to see the changes happening in terms of the source markets and what is a priority for consumers in those markets. And then we have some sustainable transformation information that we've produced recently. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Euromonitor, we're a global market research company. I've been with the company for over 20 years. And obviously during that time, we've seen travel and tourism take many hits and suffered many crises. But this current crisis that we're living through, is truly historic in its scale and its magnitude. And so when we look at global tourism in terms of value, we can see that there was an enormous drop of 57% last year in terms of international tourism spending. And this means that there's many communities and destinations around the world have been very hard hit. So the situation is still very uncertain. And so that's why at Euromonitor, we have built a travel forecast model and developed these additional scenarios. So you can see, in terms of recovery, in terms of the baseline, that we would expect recovery to happen to pre-crisis levels by 2022, if not sort of 2023. But in a worst case scenario, it could take much longer. It could take, an additional 2 years to get back to those pre-crisis levels. I think that's important that, yes, there has been, some truly fantastic research and progress made with COVID-19, with the vaccines, and, that's very, very positive. But at the same time, there's going to be stops and starts in the opening up. And so that's why we felt it's important to have these different, scenarios that we can work with. So when it comes to the individual regions around the world, there are no real winners because everybody was, truly affected very, very strongly and by COVID-19. We saw that in terms of inbound tourism spending, there was a loss of $1 trillion in one single year. And that's going to take time to rebuild. And it does also put a spotlight on the importance of building back better, as we're talking about today, because we can't revert to that old volume-driven model of old for tourism, because we know that it wasn't fit for purpose. It's really been proved to be, there were many cracks and flaws in that system. So what we see in terms of, recovery, we expect that Asia will lead the recovery and actually overtake, Europe as the leading source or holder of tourism receipts globally. But, Western Europe is also expected to recover within 4 years by 2023 in that best case scenario. When you look at, European destinations, this is international tourism spending in these destinations, looking at, 2019 versus 2020, the drop, and then, that forward-looking expectation for 2025. So yes, we are expecting, certain countries to pull forward and recover faster. In particular, we can see the Mediterranean destinations such as Portugal, Turkey, Greece, and then Switzerland expected to recover hopefully next year in a best case scenario. And then we have Croatia, which is expected to recover around about 2023, along with Italy and the UK. And then a bit slower is we're expecting for France and Spain, maybe taking, an extra year, maybe by 2024-25. We then also have this very important question that Jeremy mentioned, and the need to look at the potential sources of new source markets and to diversify the mix. And obviously this is quite a crude view. We're looking at sort of outbound source markets in terms of their total spending. So that's why we see the likes of China really sort of striding up forward in terms of their growth once that market is stabilized and international travel is back on the agenda. But just in terms of the average outbound spending per trip, it is quite interesting to see that, for example, we can see with this orange line there that, Asian source markets offer, quite a high spend per departure, and the European markets are sort of below the global average. But, it's interesting what Jeremy said about optimizing the best mix for your destination. And of course, we have this data for 210 countries. So if anybody wants to get in touch about specific markets, please do reach out afterwards. Equally, at Euromonitor, we keep an eye on, what's happening in the different product categories. This is looking at the sales across Europe, so East and West. And it's interesting to see that, the airlines and the hotels are expected to take about 5 years to recover to their 2019 levels. So there's going to be a lot of pressure. Equally, certain markets that are boosted by domestic tourism, so such as experiences, short-term rentals, they're expected to rebound a bit quicker. But the real star performers are all the digital sectors. So, where hotels, airlines, experience attraction holders have an online presence, that's where the growth and the recovery is also going to be accelerated. And particularly mobile travel, that really is the star performer. And we expect mobile travel sales in Europe to recover next year. So even though it's from a relatively low base, that's essentially where the growth is going to come from. Equally, we have some, consumer data here, looking at influential travel planning and booking features. And just across some key source markets, you can see that, for example, in Poland and Sweden, free cancellations is really important. For the UK source market, for example, they really appreciate free upgrades. There's this sort of need to become consumer-centric. We know that flexible terms and conditions is challenging for operators, but it really does resonate well with consumers. And I also, I could see that there's also this trend using technology before the trip, for example, AR and VR, to visualize a travel destination or the airport experience or the hotel even before you book, so that you can, get that sense of what it's going to be like. And I think that's so important in building trust as we go forward. In terms of, looking for trusted sources of information and advice, if we look at the sort of the data that comes out of the trust survey from Edelman, you can see that there's such a lack of trust in government, in academia, media, businesses, and people are actually looking to each other, to their families, their friends, and to their communities, whether they're like their local communities or online. So, for example, we see that in-person conversations for travel tips and advice is really prominent in source markets like Germany, particularly for young generations. But also we see that social media influencers are really important for Gen Z and the millennials across markets, particularly like the UK and the US. So looking at those consumer values in a little bit more detail, this is brand new research that was fielded in 40 countries across, talking to 40,000 consumers in January this year. And I was so pleased to see this information because of COVID and trying to understand those true effects on consumers. And so we saw an increase in interest in those global consumers who want to have a positive impact on the environment through their daily actions. So this is, we're going in the right direction. Consumers really do care about this. And then if we sort of drill down into more specific green activities that consumers are doing in these various source markets, you can see that, for example, reducing emissions through deliberately choosing an alternative lower carbon mode of transport. That's particularly high in countries like Spain, in India, We've got some strong offsetting behavior in Spain, and also purpose-driven brands, which are brands that put social and environmental criteria on a par with profit. They are really resonating. And again, we see that increased interest in purpose-driven brands. And what is interesting about this, it's not just in the advanced world. It's also happening in Brazil, in India, in the Philippines, and these brands are really resonating. Equally, we saw last year this massive spotlight on social values, particularly, what we saw with the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter. Social values also have been elevated because of COVID-19. And we see this also translating and impacting consumer behavior when they're purchasing from brands. So, for example, we have the likes that, in India and Spain, it's really important for consumers to buy from brands that align with their social and political values. And then in countries, source markets like Italy and Germany, we see that consumers even boycott brands that don't align with their beliefs. So that social pillar, it has really been, as I said, sort of elevated and on a level now as we see with the environment. In terms of consumer preferences for travel, again, just keeping an eye on what their preferences were, post-COVID, we can see, they continue to want to relax. They're looking for a safe destination. That all, makes perfect sense post-COVID. But also, again, more interest in the outdoors, nature, rural, close to home, and then less interest this year in terms of arts, heritage, shopping, urban locations, even things like adventure, which was a bit surprising because it's more about the outdoors and getting into fresh air and those kinds of activities. So when we drill down into further detail by key source markets, I was able to review which source markets are prioritizing sustainable travel features over mass tourism features. And it was quite interesting to see that China, for example, more Chinese consumers that we spoke to are selecting sustainable travel rather than mass tourism travel. Equally, we see that this is important in France, in Germany, in Italy, whereas mass tourism continues to be the priority for Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands. But there's not much in it, which is quite interesting. So just to wrap up really with our sustainable travel index to help destinations with their transformation in this area. So we launched this piece of research and we were delighted to get, help from our friends at the Travel Foundation, Greenview, and lots of other experts around the world. And here we're looking at the results of assessing 99 countries across 7 different sustainability pillars, whether it was lodging, transport, tourism demand, country risk, and then obviously environmental, social, and economic sustainability. And, we found that European destinations were at the top of the league, led by Sweden, which is quite exemplary in its approach, becoming net zero, embracing the circular economy, having a very strong, positive climate impact. So, we obviously we have Slovenia there, who's with us today. And when we also go beyond the numbers of the index and the results, we can see that it's to do with putting your money where your mouth is. So 65% of Scandinavian businesses are implementing some form of sustainable tourism strategy, and you can see that that's actually making a very strong impact on their results. Equally, when we look at Croatia, you're in the top 20. So ranked number 13, making big progress in lots of different areas. So we can see that you're very strong in environmental sustainability, very strong in sustainable lodging, transport. So this is where we were using information on, for example, from Greenview, looking at the carbon footprint of hotels, the water, the energy, the waste of hotels. So again, happy to discuss in more detail. And of course, so there's a lot of positives from COVID, despite the tragic situation. But when we look at travel and tourism companies and compare them to their peers in other industries at Euromonitor that we research, we can see that there is a disconnect and we're falling short in our commitment to sustainability. So we need to create more sustainable activists from this C-suite level down. There's definitely this 10% gap in all of these areas. But of course, there's this massive momentum to build back better, to use best practice. And of course, there's so many pioneers in the industry, such as, the Future of Tourism Coalition that we've also signed up to, Intrepid, for example, with their, sharing their best practice and actually going beyond B Corp, for example, to become, true science-based led initiatives and targets. So just to summarize, there is this paradigm shift. We can't go back. We have to resist that old volume model. We need to transition to a value and quality driven tourism. We need to be truly holistic about the benefits that tourism can offer, as Jeremy was explaining, and look at those sort of invisible impacts and be honest with our communities. And equally, there are so many great trends and ways to drive this sustainable transformation, combining smart tourism approaches along with that sort of technology and digitalization that we were talking about. And ultimately, looking after our culture, our communities, and our biodiversity and the environment is going to protect and create USPs and actually provide a much more elevated experience for visitors and build those really strong emotional connections. So there is great optimism despite these challenges. And thank you very much for inviting me to present today.
Thank you, Caroline. It was really interesting and reliable information that supported Jeremy's presentations and the whole topic of the webinar. Now, my colleague Isidora will share with us some examples from Croatia and also a really interesting presentation. Isidora is a research associate at the Institute, has great experience in sustainability, and welcome, Isidora.
Hello. Thank you, Martina, for the introduction. I would also like to thank all the previous presenters for their very interesting presentations. I would like to carry on with the topic we are kind of forgetting of. Of course, this last year and those years ahead of us are very challenging, considering the COVID situation and the under tourism we are facing. And we were quite quick to forget what are the challenges that we had before the COVID situation. The over tourism, which was one of the main topics and one main challenges, issues, we can say, during the last 5 years in various destinations in Europe and worldwide, is kind of put aside and kind of not forgotten of, but not a topic discussed very widely. Therefore, I would like to raise that topic a bit again. And first of all, I would like to point out that this Corona situation we are facing is actually a kind of a product of all our actions, not only actions of tourism, but also actions from agriculture, urbanization, transport, which have increasingly changed the land use, changed the landscape succession is happening worldwide. You can see it on this map. And for the one of the main problems occurring is the increased contact between humans and animals, which products in zoonotic diseases, where coronavirus is one of those most known for now, but other diseases also occurring because of the over industry, over tourism, over all of our actions that we are doing. Of course, there was, as we all know, the reactions we have on the COVID crisis are worse, but especially in the first phases, there was a great fear. I think that that fear is kind of disappearing and is changed with some other emotions, but fear of virus, fear of people, and in the end, fear of traveling, which caused this great under-tourism, is also one of the most important fears. Also, social and afterwards physical distancing is something that is quite different from the nature of tourism industry. The interaction between people, interaction between guests and facilitators is quite important here, and it's lacking now. And in the end, there are some positive aspects, even though perhaps they are not that obvious. That is rediscovering of some new areas, suburban areas, rural areas. People are trying to move from the urban centers to rediscover agriculture, rediscover local production. And in the end, we rediscover the values of the nature and the surrounding around us. Those are some of the reactions that we can recognize. Of course, they are very individual and can change a lot, but in the end, we can point out these ones. And therefore, because of all these reactions, some kind of change has to happen, obviously, in us, in industry, and diverse types of transformations have been discussed by numerous. I can say in the last year, there were hundreds of papers in tourism that discussed the transformations that have to be done because of this crisis. I read somewhere that regarding the academic work on COVID, of course, there are most papers from medicine, from pharmaceuticals, and then tourism. So there are so many academic papers considering COVID. It's obvious that this part of industry is very burdened with this problem, of course. Definitely, a lot of academics also say that we are at crossroads, and that tourism strategies, policies, and products are coming that will be something we can connect with the new age. But is that really like that? We have tried to test it through some case studies, and I will tell you later what we concluded. But are we really changing the road in this situation where we unfortunately are facing great financial losses in tourism? Do we have the financial power, not only our power, but financial power to make those changes? Two main directions of changes have been recognized. One is reducing the number of tourists, and the other is reinventing tourism. Of course, those two actions are overlapping to different actions that can get out of it. Of course, over-tourism reversal is one of the most discussed topics considering the over-tourism, because everybody sees, considering the fears, considering the health security and so on, that over-tourism reversal will have to happen just because of the health safety that is on the first place of one of the motives to travel in the future, at least in the next few years. But also some good trends are occurring. For example, domestic tourism shift. I think that's especially in Croatia, but in all our region, which we kind of have not put such an emphasis on. And it's very important for crisis, for time of crisis, to have a domestic tourism shift. Also development of various new products, introducing new destinations also, which have not been now recognized before in the over-tourism era, but will be recognized in post-COVID era, hopefully. When it comes to tourism, as you all know, if you can recall, just a year ago, it was an arch enemy of sustainability, we can say it like that. In various destinations, especially in Europe, from Barcelona, Venice, Dubrovnik, to some destination in Southeast Asia and so on, the over-tourism was a problem which was mostly affecting the local community, where they lost their normal lives, considering the over-tourism problem. And of course, this is a topic that has been discussed by professionals, by the politics, by the academics, and unfortunately, no final solution has occurred. in a long time, even though it was very obvious that it's time to reset over tourism. Different destinations had different strategies. Some were more rigid, some were very trying to do it through the development of different types of products. But in the end, over tourism did not reset until COVID came. Regarding the Croatia, here are some sustainability indicators for Adriatic Croatia in the pre-COVID period, where you can see some increases in just 2 years. For example, daily number of tourism nights in 2 years have increased for 14%. It was a good question. Where is the limit? How much can we grow more? We didn't find out, fortunately or unfortunately, as the COVID year came. But also, it's not only in the increase of the number of tourism nights. Of course, there was a great increase in the waste production. Can a destination handle that kind of waste production till each 2 years for 15% of more waste for each year? Is that something that we can cope with? Those were the questions that we have been raising through our work on the Institute, the Crossed Observatory, and so on. Unfortunately, the COVID crisis came and became the obvious solution or not. I wouldn't call it like that. But in any case, now we are where we are. The over-tourism shifted to under-tourism. The tourism-dependent communities worldwide become communities in crisis. Their finances are broken. Their usual well-being is threatened by the corona crisis. Health was an underestimated theme, topic which was mostly discussed on the level of the health tourism, but now it's becoming the main focus of tourism. And of course, the nature was heavily burdened along with the cultural heritage, and now it's in a partial recovery. We couldn't say it's a recovery. We would need a number of years for the nature to recover, but this is the state now. And now it's a question, what kind of these scenarios are going to happen? Are we considering all the academic papers? We should go to the experiential tourism. We should achieve communities in balance, a holistic approach to our health. And in the end, nature would be respected and esteemed. But it's quite a question. Do we really have the power? Does tourism have the power? Not only the willingness, but real financial power to do that? Or we are just going to run away back to as it was as soon as possible? We cannot blame anybody because of that. It's in human nature to want to get back as it was, since people were living more relaxed, considering the type of life. And of course, in the manner of finances, it was a quite better situation. So in the end, we can again go to the same situation, perhaps of over-tourism, of communities seeking to return as soon as possible to the pre-pandemic period. We can also have again the burdening of the nature and the nature resources. So it's a question. Those question marks are raising a great question. It's on each of us, on each of our destination, of our DMOs and so on. What is the path we are going to turn to? I have done with my colleagues Martina, Damir and Josip, and research in Dubrovnik, as it was one of the most famous over-tourism destinations, as we can say it's famous. There were vast tourism impacts on the local community and very high level of dependence on tourism, and still is. And it was very interesting to find out that despite the losses during the pandemic, in the survey we conducted with the local community, some forms of tourism were still undesirable. Most of the respondents still didn't want the cruisers to come back, didn't want the buses with a lot of one-day visitors to come back. So the transformation, the willingness to transform, even though this has been a terrible year, is still there. People are wanting to transform, at least as they say, but not all, of course. Some 60% believe that the COVID-19 is a good opportunity for tourism transformations, but still 30% of the respondents do not believe in that. And in the end, something has also, it's important to stress out that the respondents believe that the residents should be able to have affordable prices in the whole year, which is not the case in the Dubrovnik in the pre-pandemic period. So that's something that's positive that came out in this part. And it's important to stress out when you talk with people living in the over-tourism destinations, they often say that they had a beautiful year where they could really live in their destination, not only be some strangers that try to go as quick as possible to the city. Because of the almost zero impact state in some destinations, eliminating tourism, we have a great opportunity for monitoring tourism. So we can have now tabula rasa, zero state, from which we can now measure future transport emission, noise emission, light pollution, waste production, and so on. So it's a great opportunity to see how was it when we had small visitation, moderate, and what has happened when we increase our visitation again. And finally, there are some ideas how to reset in post-COVID area. Those are not my ideas, but ideas of various academics. We should shift from mass manifestations to custom-made small group interactions, from leisure and recreation and aesthetic values to the involvement model, where we interpret all the basic values, ecosystem services, heritage interpretation, from the sun, sea, and sand to the educational tourism, to various special modes of tourism, which we must really raise questions. Do we have the strength to do now? Or we want to go as soon as possible to sun, sea again? Or nature-based excursion should become ecotourism, as it should be, not only those soft ecotourism elements. Some of the resets can also be focused on a small number on itineraries for small number of participants. Here is a link for our project. One of our projects we are doing on the Interreg project Estimate Plus, where we are developing small number of participants ecotourism packages, which have been started to develop before the COVID era, but now have become something that is our reality we should really focus on. Also, we must emphasize health benefits of staying, not only of the safety of our destination, but also health benefits of staying in such a specific natural environment of our destination. Ensuring physical distance when needed, of course, not in all interactions, but in organized transport and so on. And of course, shifting from the mass organized routes itineraries to the small number itineraries. And in the end, emphasizing I must emphasize the security through the strengthening the capacity of health services. It's easy to say, let's say it like that, especially in our region, which is unfortunately less developed than some other parts of the European Union, but it is something that is our future. And in the end, the decision is on us, on all of us. I'm glad to see a lot of attendees here from the DMOs, from the various cities, from the various regions. In the end, the fragility of our human health and the economic system we are living in has been shown so quickly and so hurtfully that we must ask ourselves the main two questions. Can we expect a change in the development paradigm in which growth discourse causing over-tourism has been dominant so far? So let's continue as it was. Or we are going to embrace those usual tourism patterns and go back to normal as soon as possible, and unfortunately abnormal for the nature and for some parts of communities at least. So the decision is not easy, and I do not believe that this decision is black and white. The truth is in the gray area. So we have to try to combine to go as quickly as possible to the recovery, but not to the recovery as it was, but to better recovery. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Isidora. Great presentation. Well, now the Graham Jackson will give us some guidelines framework, framework for destination recovery. After Isidora gave us example of Dubrovnik over tourism, Graham can give us some tools and framework for recovery.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I should just share my screen. Everyone see this okay? Yeah? Okay, Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate in this important conversation. So I think the previous presentations have really laid out that we are at a clear crossroads with multiple roads ahead and decisions to make. Of course, as Isadora just spelled out, there are huge pressures to go back to the way things were, and as I think Jeremy spelled out very clearly in his presentation, that the way things were weren't necessarily the way things should and could be. I think Caroline's presentation also laid out that why there's a really good business case for travel businesses, for destinations to choose a new route. I'm going to talk to you just for a few minutes today about some of the work that we've been doing here at the Travel Foundation to help destinations navigate the road ahead, to really help them focus on what they can do to support a better recovery. So I'm going to just share with you a little bit about a program that we put together that was something that we felt was very important at the Travel Foundation, working with an organisation called City Nation Place. And this is all around recovery strategies, tourism strategies, really. One thing that destinations are very good at doing is developing strategies and laying out their priorities for the year ahead. And clearly we are in very different times today than we were pre-COVID. So in a sense, we have a little bit of a blank page. Yes, there are all those pressures and concerns that we must deal with, but how we rebuild tourism is something that, to an extent, we get to decide in consultation with our stakeholders. There's a couple of examples here of quite progressive strategies that have come out in recent years that really do help to signpost a new way forward for destinations that isn't built around just year-on-year growth, that isn't just built around further tourism development, that's really looking at how tourism can support destinations to better meet their development priorities, how they can ensure that their local communities are benefiting and opportunity is being created. How are they moving forward with some of those bigger societal agendas like inclusivity? How are they responding to the climate emergency? How are they managing the implications of growth where growth occurs? So last summer we got together with City Nation Place, a media platform that many of you might be familiar with, and we teamed up with them to offer our support to destinations that were struggling with working out, where they go from here. So we developed a framework to really assess recovery strategies, to assess recovery plans, and we worked with several destinations. We actually worked with 4 destinations in total, very different destinations. So the city of Edinburgh, the island of Grenada in the Caribbean, with the Indigenous tourism group in Ontario, and also with Destination Colorado. And we really provided a bit of technical support to those destinations, as sort of a shoulder to cry on, a critical friend role to give them some new lenses to look at recovery. So yes, to really strengthen their long-term planning for destinations, and also, as well as to give them as well as for us to give them our advice, we also brought them together so that they could learn and share from one another, because although they're very, very different destinations, very different contexts, what was quite illuminating was quite how many of the similar things that they were going through at this time. And the benefit that they could get from one another, and the ideas that they could bring to one another in that sort of peer-to-peer environment was particularly beneficial. We felt, every destination to a certain extent is grappling with the same set of issues. So let me tell you a little bit more about this framework. The framework is designed around a number of useful planning and management considerations. And this is really designed not only for recovery planning, but for more general strategic destination development. So regardless of where you are in the journey, whether you're thinking about what a recovery plan could contain, to whether you're sense checking a plan that you've already developed. We also know that this is an approach that's quite useful, even if you're just setting up or getting into destination management for the first time. So we laid out this program and looked at a number of different areas. One of the areas that really came up in our work with these 4 destinations was concerns around what has COVID done to our supply. We talk about going back to normal, building back, supporting our small businesses, but how do we actually know what the impact of COVID has been on the tourism supply chain in our destinations? This is something that every destination needs to get its head around, because it has huge implications for customer experience, for capacity, for future regrowth, and the small, medium businesses haven't received the support of their larger counterparts, and in a lot of cases they do make up the majority of a destination's tourism economy. So this is one area that we sort of look at within this methodology, and really help destinations to work through their approaches to understanding, is there a supply crisis in our destination? What can we do to avoid one? How can we provide the practical support that our small businesses might need, beyond just the financial support, but helping them to adapt, evolve their products and services to meet new market demands, some of which I think Caroline touched on very nicely in her report. So let's just give you a couple of examples of how some destinations that we worked with in this program were responding to this. So the Edinburgh Tourism Action Group focused their efforts initially on creating an inventory of their travel businesses, really understanding which businesses were involved in tourism in some way, and how they had been impacted by the crisis, what support they had in place, if any. And then they also pulled together lots of information and guidance and shared that with these businesses. So if there were webinars that they could attend that could help them, if there was assistance and direction that they could give them to access financial support, access other types of business support, they were able to really mobilize and become a support network for the travel businesses, tourism businesses in the city. I shared with you, I think Jeremy touched on as well, they were one of the, Scotland as a destination that has already launched, I think it was just a couple of months before COVID hit, its vision for tourism in 2030. This is something that they've doubled down their commitment to through COVID. So they haven't had a knee-jerk response. They haven't suddenly gone to a short-term view. And they've been very much communicating this with their stakeholders over these past months, really doubling down on this resident-first carbon net zero future. And in many ways, believe that the recovery, the great reset, if you like, is an opportunity to actually accelerate on some of those plans that they already have had. The Colorado Tourism Office, it's developed a technical assistance program, and it provided small grants also to businesses to help with product innovations, to help with development and evolution of products to meet the demands that they were starting to see. emerging. So just some quick tips if you're looking for some guidance, and this sort of gives you a little peek at sort of what this this methodology, the sorts of recommendations it produces. So there's just a few ideas here for DMOs thinking about, well, how can I get my head around the supply crisis? Is there one? How can we support our small businesses to adapt, to evolve, to have stronger foundations for recovery? The next area that I think a lot of destinations have really suddenly, maybe for the first time, really recognized the value or the opportunity in the domestic markets and their nearby markets. And you know, we know that this is something that a lot of destinations haven't really focused their efforts on before. They just kind of assume, well, this will just happen. We don't need to actively develop product, or we don't need to promote to these audiences. And this is something that perhaps has changed quite dramatically since COVID. So, I mean, this is again something that we need to recognise if we're going to, if this might be part of our future tourism mix. How do we understand what value that they bring to our destination? Jeremy touched on the work we did in Tenerife. There's a perception that international visitors, big spenders, bring more benefits. Is that actually the case? They also have a much bigger carbon footprint. They also have much higher costs for our destinations. So if we can start to look at these things and actually understand the value that different types of tourism brings to our destinations, then we can make sure that we're developing the right strategies, the right policies to encourage the best types of tourism for our destination. But obviously they have different needs. So we need to understand what those needs are. We need to find out what it is they want, what would encourage them, and support our businesses to adapt and evolve their products accordingly. So just to give you a couple of quick examples on that, Grenada Tourism Authority had never focused on domestic tourism before or inter-island tourism. It just wasn't in their mandate. When the borders closed, they had really no choice but to look at it as an opportunity, and actually did a domestic tourism survey and found out a lot more about the residents and what their needs were and how they could potentially be encouraged to patronise tourism products and services. And they actually launched a campaign for the first time, a domestic tourism campaign, talking about Paradise at Home, encouraging local travel, inter-islands travel in that location. Similarly, Indigenous Tourism Ontario did some really hyper-local promotional campaigns. So they were really getting information into residents' hands, people that might be stuck in their postcode, might be stuck in their locality. What is there to do and see, and to maybe alleviate that stress, that boredom? What's open? What can they do? How can they get out and enjoy and connect with their own destination on their doorstep? And this also there was also a focus on trying to increase people getting out and about, walking more, and trying to increase public awareness of cultural sites. So things like upgrading signage, highlighting important cultural sites, important cultural stories to residents, which ultimately will not only benefit the community and the preservation of these things of cultural significance, but will also be a very good thing when the international visitors return. So just some quick tips again on that. Do we really understand what our residents, our domestic visitors, our nearby source markets need and want, and how could we do that better? How could we also think about these people as potential targets for our marketing communications? What sort of information might they need? How can we connect with them? And also, how can we communicate what we find with our local businesses to help them adapt their offer and ultimately prosper from those types of visitation? So I just wanted to really quickly end on this. We've now turned this methodology into a program.
Graham, sorry for interrupting you. Just just a little bit summarize, because we have one more.
This is my last slide, Martina. I promise. Yeah, we've now designed a program around this, and we've been working with other destinations, bringing this methodology to them. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in finding out more, do get in touch with us through the Institute, and we can we'd love to hear from you and love to share more, because we don't have enough time today. So that's my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Graham, for such a valuable framework. And after this great presentations, we will finalize with Bernadette Papp and Stefan Hartmann. Welcome, Bernadette.
Hello. Good morning. Hi.
Good morning, Stefan.
I will share the presentation right now. Hopefully you can see this. Yes, I think it's working.
Yes, it is.
Perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah, we would like to say something about destination recovery and resilience, and focus on something I think many of us are dealing with, is the decision-making and governance issues that relate to destination recovery. I think we have a number of perspectives and ideas about how the future of tourism is going to look like, what are important aspects. But I think what is really important to think about who's going to do what, and yeah, are we aligning our ideas and visions? And I think that's well, really important, because of course I think if we look at the earlier presentations, we are on the one hand loving the tourism industry, and on the other hand sometimes even hating the tourism industry. It's really difficult to yeah, to find a single approach to this. But I think the fact that we see the negative impacts on the one hand and the positive impacts on the other hand shows that it is a huge destination management issue. We'd like to focus on this. Very briefly, I think this is hopefully well known, that we had if you look at destinations and the development, if you put them in a timeline, you can imagine that at some point it's discovered by the first tourist, so to say. At some point we see a business opportunity, and we see a period of growth, sometimes even untamed growth, with a lot of negative externalities. And I think we're slowly but surely moving towards this situation where we are talking about responsible destinations, resilient destinations, sustainable tourism, and you name it. I think, but by doing so, we also make our life more and more complicated. So we involve more goals, more stakeholders, we involve communities. We have to do a lot of things, and we have to connect the local level of the destination to regional levels, to national levels, international levels, to really find a good approach. And I think that is something that we were thinking about already 2, 3, 4 years ago, especially when we talked a lot about over-tourism. But I think this is not going away. I think maybe COVID delays our discussions a bit, maybe fuels it also on the other hand. But if you look at the forecasts also by Euromonitor, I think sooner or later we are talking about large numbers of tourists, yeah, the visitor management issues, and I think also the destination management issues. And something like I would like to call destination governance. So how are we going to deal with this, with all of these stakeholders, all of these different ideas that we have about the future of tourism, because they do not necessarily align very well. Of course, there's commercial interest, the public interest, the community interests, and it's yeah, it's a matter of negotiating and talking and yeah, miscommunication, everything in between that is going to happen. But we need to be strategic in this, I think. Of course, COVID challenges very much. Of course, we see the impacts, we see the problems, and we see the issues. I think at the same time, at the moment, we are slowly but surely a bit more positive. We see possibilities. We see all sorts of tests at the moment where travel is made possible. Festivals are being organized. So there's not a question if we will see a recovery, but it's more the question, when do we see this, and when is it going to take place? How are we going to see this recovery? Just a brief sign for me, what I would like to share is this. This is a graph from the hotel occupancy rates in Amsterdam. In the Netherlands, we had a lockdown at the early mid-March last year. But in the summer, many of the regulations were relaxed. And I think this graph clearly shows it. At the moment it was relaxed, people were, the motivation to travel was there. And you see, again, a spike in terms of the occupancy rates as soon as this was possible. And when we entered a second lockdown in the autumn period, again, it dropped immediately. But I think it shows that the reason or the intention, the motivation to travel is just very large. That makes us wonder, and this is something that we created. There's a report behind this, so if you're interested in the scenarios that we created, please send me an email later on. I can share the document, because what we try to envision as being a European Tourism Futures Institute, we looked at the futures of tourism, and we said, what could be how could this future look like? Will we have a short crisis or a long crisis? And how will consumers react? Will they focus on themselves, or do we focus on more of the community and the collective? And if we then create different future perspectives, what could they be? On the one hand, we see this business as usual scenario. I think that is where many businesses, many corporations really want to go back to. This is what we do. This is where our investments are. We want to do the things that we did before the COVID outbreak. On the other hand, we know that this crisis is longer maybe than expected. So we definitely see a survival of the fittest scenario occurring. Many businesses go bankrupt. They have issues with financing themselves. But on the other hand, we see the alternatives, the responsible tourism actions, companies that reinvent themselves, focus on their domestic markets, promote sustainable travel. There are a lot of initiatives there, and we might see a business as unusual scenario where we see more of this, but in a bigger volumes of people and organizations and destinations that really try to do their ways of working in a different way. But I think if we look at this framework, I think we are at the survival of the fittest scenario. We see some initiatives that are at the bottom two scenarios, but at the same time, I think many of the industry, many industry partners are kind of longing for this business as usual scenario, just to get it over with of this COVID-19 situation and make a profit again. So I think this is something that we are. It's a big dilemma, and I think it's about making decisions. And the strategic challenge, I think, to sum up. It's a big question. So do we want to bounce back to where we came from and talk about recovery in that sense, and talk about recovery as business as usual, because this is where we have our practices, our routines, our networks, that's where our investments are? Or do we bounce forward? Do we reset tourism? Do we do things in a very fundamentally different way and embrace sustainability and conscious travel? Well, to be honest, I wonder if we are able to do this, and I think it's a collaborative approach between industry and governments, NGOs, communities. But to do so, I think we really have to rethink our, especially our governance approach and who needs to do what. And I think that's a big, still we have ideas about this, but how to organize this, I think that's more challenging. And my colleague Bernadette will say more about this right now. So Bernadette, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you, Stefan, and good morning, everyone. Well, following up on what Stefan was saying, we are indeed facing a strategic challenge, and in search for a solution to this challenge and in search for a more conscious approach towards destination governance, we joined forces with the Travel Foundation and the World Travel and Tourism Council. And basically, we've been looking at ways to build back better, really. And so we've been working on a publication concerning destination stewardship. And we do believe that to build back better, we need to address the root causes and the fundamental issues of our industry. And we see destination stewardship as an approach that can help us do that, and that can help us move towards a more resilient tourism industry. Well, we do think that destination stewardship is an ideal approach because on the one hand, it embraces sustainability, and on the other hand, it suggests the need for a more legitimate and effective destination governance model. So to help destinations move towards destination stewardship, we developed the destination stewardship framework and the diagnostic tool. Next slide, please. Before I would introduce the framework and the tool, I would like to just briefly point out some of the trends that are signaling the need for a more rigorous approach that allows for better co-management. I will only point out a few from the long list that you can see on the slide. Tourism growth, first of all, often fueled by loose tourism policies. As we know, this trend has led to issues such as over-tourism, as discussed by Isidora as well earlier. Now, of course, we have the exact opposite situation. We are technically witnessing under-tourism, but we do want to avoid the issue reoccurring in the future. Then there have been growing calls for a global transition towards a climate neutral and green economy. So the sector is constantly challenged to adopt new definitions of tourism success, meaning new KPIs are needed, in fact. And then the third trend I would like to point out is the increasing governmental interest in destination governance. We can see an increasing recognition for the need for collective accountability of shared destination resources, which is definitely a really good thing. However, as much as there is growing awareness, there are some major obstacles that can hold us back from transformation and, as Stefan said it earlier, from bouncing forward. And one of these issues is the fragmented nature of our industry. So horizontal, vertical, and sectoral fragmentation is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed. Of course, the lack of clear mandate coupled with clashing agendas and lack of trust often leads to poor cross-level and also cross-sector cooperation. Then another barrier relates to the lack of shared responsibility over what we call, thanks to the Travel Foundation, the invisible burden of tourism. And finally, the absence of reliable and accessible data is also a major problem. Next slide, please. So what we propose here is an approach that can help to address these core issues. And here we have outlined some of the key benefits of this approach. In view of the private sector, this approach may lead to, for instance, a level playing field, increased government support, more awareness of destination needs, also protected investment, and in general, to a more resilient supply chain. Concerning the public sector, they would, for instance, obtain a clear mandate for destination management, which is absolutely crucial, could develop better community relations, and also could overall build a more resilient visitor economy, of course, in agreement with the private sector. And as a result, the benefits for the community are quite clear. For instance, a stronger voice, enhanced quality of life, and also, for instance, diversified amenities, among many other benefits. Next slide, please. So as we can see, destination stewardship approach has various benefits. But what we wanted to do is to further explore these lines of thought and map various plausible scenarios based on the level of engagement of the various stakeholder groups. So we created a destination stewardship framework that you can see on the slide with 4 scenarios to provoke thinking, basically, and to inspire discussions around destination management. So just very briefly, scenario 1 is titled Missed Opportunity. This is a no engagement scenario, and it is from a destination stewardship perspective, the worst case scenario with a lot of missed opportunities. We do believe that this scenario may be most plausible in emerging destinations, for instance. The scenario 2 describes a top-down approach, and scenario 3 refers to a bottom-up approach with self-organization from the private sector. Well, these scenarios may surface where the trends that I described earlier are shaping developments and there is more or less a steady progress. And then we've got scenario 4, which describes the full engagement by all scenario. This scenario may be more appropriate for issues that require significant effort or, let's say, even transformational change. Next slide, please. So to help stakeholders successfully transition towards their ideal scenario, we also developed a tool, a diagnostic tool. And the table on the slide is a simplified version of this tool. In the publication, you will find a more detailed version, including, of course, also a detailed explanation on the use of the tool. But just in a nutshell, with the tool, what we intended to do was to help stakeholders to answer a set of governance-related questions that are important to better understand their current situation and also to highlight improvement points. The tool can be used to address various issues and various challenges at various levels and scales. So it is a scalable tool. Therefore, the scope of the inquiry, of course, needs to be very well defined at the beginning of the process. And then various aspects of governance are addressed through a collaborative thinking process. Some of the aspects that we have highlighted in the table are, for instance, is there a strategic vision? Is there a shared vision amongst relevant stakeholders? What are the current and planned policies, plans, and projects? Various forms of collaboration, questions around resource mobilization, questions around power relations, perceived and real legitimacy. Of course, including, for instance, is there a clear mandate? Is there a clear division of responsibilities? But also, are there mechanisms to ensure accountability and transparency? And so after the table has been completed and the process has been completed, ideally, it becomes evident whether there is agreement on the reviewed aspects of governance amongst the participating stakeholders. And of course, discrepancies can reveal priority areas that need to be addressed. And the last slide, please. So this was a very brief explanation of the tool, but coming to the end of the presentation, because we don't have much time, I just would like to highlight the main points that we intended to make today with this presentation, such as the need for integration, horizontal, vertical, and also sectoral. For this, of course, engagement is crucial, and so are shared responsibilities, shared objectives, and effective ways for collaboration, including mechanisms that ensure transparency and accountability. So thank you very much for your attention. If you would like to know more about the tool and the framework, please reach out to us.
Thank you, Bernadette, for such great presentation, and Stefan, you too. I mean, we already received so many comments on a chat great presentation. I'm sure that participants have so many questions, so we can already start with the Q&A session. We encourage everyone to post questions in chat box, and then we will ask our panelists to answer the questions. Also, I would like to emphasize the point that after this Q&A session, we will have another session with the panelists to share the opinions from the region of Montenegro, Slovenia, Croatia, and we encourage you, of course, everyone to stay with us till 1 o'clock. So it's not too long, and you will get definitely valuable insights after all these presentations. So we can start with the questions. Does anyone have, or shall I start with the?
There are 2 questions in Q&A session. 3.
Can you just read it, because I didn't see it, sorry.
Okay, so there are a few questions from Professor Lidija Petrić. Thank you for participating. Congratulations to all panelists for interesting presentation. However, it's a bit a comment. Despite the recommendations that you have given, the key questions still remain unanswered. Do we opt for tourism degrowth, no more growth, but instead steady state tourism? And if it is so, what is the level of the demand supply that may be acceptable? And do you think that government, especially such as Syncropa, really opt to the reduction of the number of the visitors? So do we really believe it mostly in the regrowth of tourism or degrowth?
Jeremy,
shall you start with the answer? Would you like to share your opinion?
Yeah, I think the question, we need to unpack the question a little bit because my message, for example, is not necessarily anti-growth. I don't necessarily think that we that growth is a bad thing by nature. In fact, if we go back to the presentation and ask the question, why do we want tourism? One of the reasons is, of course, the economic opportunity that it can bring. And we will need to have growth again in order for that to occur. So I think it's much more important to look at the implications of that growth and to understand the various costs and benefits, because you could end up in a scenario with more visitors, reduction of negative impact, and more net positive value. For example, I don't think that's necessarily an impossible scenario. So I think that just by focusing on numbers, it ends up being sort of the wrong question. Can we go back to the way growth was before, where growth was not properly managed? We didn't understand it, and we didn't have the right mechanisms to deal with it. I think that's the scenario that needs to be avoided. I hope that actually this kind of positive pro-growth message, pro-managed growth message can be more palatable in some ways, because we're also talking about people's livelihoods here. And I think we have to be very, very aware that people want tourism to return for a variety of reasons.
I just add a quick perspective to that, because I think that growth, we associate that with numbers, but yeah, I think it's, as Jeremy is sharing, that if we can grow value, we can grow opportunity, we can measure those things, we can couple that word growth with other things. We don't just need to think about it in number terms. I kind of think of it saying, if I say I have 100 coins, what's the value of those 100 coins? It's unless we say what they're, unless we understand the value of them, we can't really know whether I need another 100, or what happens if I give 50 of them away. I think actually over the next few years, where Caroline's slides were showing how tourism will return, it's going to be really incumbent. The successful destinations will be those that get their heads around how can we do more with less, because no destination is going to have 2019 levels of tourism this year, probably. And so how do we actually focus on doing the best with what we have, and really focusing that growth in areas where we're going to get the most benefit.
Perhaps next question is, I'm curious to know if Croatia will limit cruise ships, since everybody is saying that one day tourists are not what we want. It's on level of destination to decide. I know that Dubrovnik has reduced the number of cruisers even before the pandemic on 2 cruisers in the same time in the town, not per day, but in the same time. So there were some reductions even before. Perhaps our panelist, Mr. Stella, can comment for Split.
Hello, everybody. For Split, we don't have really a problem with the cruises, because they're not endangering the city like in Dubrovnik, because when you have a cruiser in Dubrovnik, then you have 50 buses driving to town. That is not happening in the city of Split. But nevertheless, they should be managed more in coordination with the tourist board, the city authorities, not only the port. So that's mostly important, to be managed by different views, not only the view of how many cruisers can we get in 1 year. Like Dubrovnik said, they don't want too many cruisers at the same time. Also, it's important to have these guests transported in such a way that they don't cause congestion in a critical city. In a critical city, how to say, posts, for example, don't put them all in the same place, because you're going to create congestion. So, but we don't generally have a problem in Split with that.
We can follow with another question. Alisa Plasic, I find statistics for 2021 quite optimistic, especially from Caroline's presentation. We are at the very end of March right now. How realistic are these predictions for season 2021?
That's a great question, and that's why we've built a model which we update on a quarterly basis. And so the model takes into account and looks at 210 countries and assesses the progress that's being made with the vaccines. And equally, it assesses, the level of cases and deaths in each country, as well as the economic impact, because that's one thing that we've not really addressed today, is just the sheer level of recession that we're living through in Europe. And so our baseline is that first half of the year is going to be really tough. But, I think we saw it in some of the presentations today that, there is this, as soon as things have settled down with the pandemic, the demand, that pent up demand comes back. And I guess that's the question, how do we manage that? Because, everybody here can't wait to travel. Everybody wants to travel again because our freedoms have been restricted. And so it's also about when that's going to kick in. And that's why we also have these additional layered scenarios. If there is an additional delay to the vaccine rollouts globally, if there are multiple waves in addition to what we've already seen, then we have these more pessimistic scenarios, and that then knocks the recovery by at least 2 years.
Yeah.
Happy to discuss in more detail if people would like to get in touch.
You're hoping for the best.
That's right, we are.
So another question in praxis, what do you mean by community in Build Back Better? What's going to change? Graham, can you answer this question? Since it's a part of your framework, the community?
Sure. I think by community, it can mean lots of different things. And we, in the context of this framework, we're really looking at the residents, at the people who live in these destinations, live and work in these destinations. Small business community in particular, so those that are connected to tourism. That's kind of what we talk about there.
Okay, thank you. What do you find as the most challenging thing with the community? How to motivate them for the Building Back Better?
I mean, for me personally. For destinations, perhaps it's better I put myself in their position. I think it's about communication, really. Having a very strong and clear rationale. And being able to communicate that and get buy-in. I think that we've certainly seen some examples from some of the destinations that we work with. It's not going to happen overnight by any means, but let's take Scotland as an example. Scotland had a bold vision. They said, we want to move away from growth. I'm sure, the Netherlands came out with a vision for 2030, and it was very challenging.
How was your experience with the Greece?
Sorry, in Greece, working with. So
How's your experience with the community in Greece? Are they willing for change? Actually, are they up for change?
Sorry, I don't think we've. I'm not quite sure what the nature of the question, because we haven't done any work in Greece.
But you're planning to do it.
Sorry, yes, we are. We're going to be working with this month, in fact, coming up with some Greek demos to help. So I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, that's the most challenging.
If I could add something on the community front, especially the issue about resident engagement. 2 points that I think are really important that we need to overcome. One is that up till now, in many places, resident engagement has been seen as a box to tick. So it's, there's a participatory approach. Maybe we did a survey, check. And I think this is not really enough. There needs to be a more dynamic resident engagement process, and not only in the planning stage, but on a regular and consistent basis, a regular two-way dialogue. And that leads me to the other challenge. The other challenge is that most residents, and this is also true of small businesses who are part of the tourism sector, are relatively driven by emotional response to tourism, not evidence-based response. That emotional response comes from how do I feel about what's happening in my city? How do I feel about the fact that my street is crowded, or the store has changed, or the prices have gone up, or that I'm making money because it's busy here, or whatever. So it's personal and it's emotional, but it's not often enough evidence-based. So I think this dialogue needs to be much more dynamic, where visitor and residents are able to really understand and have much more information about holistic costs and benefits of tourism in places, and vice versa, that destinations can also get have a regular flow of dialogue and information from communities in order to really understand their needs. If we're going to make tourism about, again, in Building Back Better, asking why do we want tourism, and the goal is for us to have thriving communities, really that must be one of the KPIs, that communities themselves are indeed thriving.
Okay, thank you so much for everyone for this Q&A session. We are already in time limit, so we need to follow the panel to introduce the panelists for another session. I thank you everyone for the great presentations and valuable insights for the Q&A session. Now, before the panelists, we will have the message from our Minister of Tourism and Sport, Ms. Nikolina Bernets, and this is a great opportunity to welcome her, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the organizers of this webinar, the Croatian Institute for Tourism and Travel Foundation. Your discussions today will certainly be helpful in a better preparation for this year, as well as the post-pandemic years ahead of us. As we all know, Croatian GDP relies quite heavily on the tourism revenues, and therefore it is clear that tourism must be assisted in its recovery and resilience building as much as possible. We should certainly learn from the challenges of COVID and use these experiences to build a more sustainable model of Croatian tourism for the future. The pandemic is still not over, unfortunately. This is particularly worrying since the whole tourism and travel industry has been unable to work in full capacity for a whole year, and the situation remains unpredictable due to new variants and a relatively slow vaccination process in the European Union. This year, one of the main motives of preconditions for travel remains safety, and I believe that vaccination, both of tourists and their hosts in Croatia, together with adherence to epidemiological measures, will help us achieve the desired tourism outcomes. An important part of our responsible approach is the flagship project of the Ministry of the Tourism and Sport, which encourages tourism sector to uphold the highest epidemiological standards. As a part of this project, a national safety label, Safe Stay in Croatia, is awarded to all tourism service providers that implement the prescribed safety measures and protocols, therefore guaranteeing a certain level of safety to our guests. It is understandable that in the years of pandemics, we are mostly oriented towards crisis management, putting out fires. The period ahead of us is the period of creation and reform. So, this year, and in the years ahead, in parallel with building a COVID-proof model of tourism, we also need to start to addressing the long-standing challenges of the Croatian tourism. An insufficient level of tourism sustainability reflected in the uneven seasonal and territorial distribution of tourist demand, which sets Croatia among countries with the highest index of tourism intensity in the Mediterranean region, as well as insufficient level of quality and balance of the accommodation capacity structure, since hotels in Croatia represent only 11% of the total accommodation capacities. We will address these challenges through preparation and implementation of our new Sustainable Tourism Strategy until 2030 and the National Sustainable Tourism Development Plan 2021-27 as long-term frameworks for the tourism development. Our National Recovery and Resilience Plan, to be presented soon, is an additional opportunity for a strategic push forward. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, we have to concrete now and overcoming the challenges of crucial first years of post-pandemic recovery, as well as creating an innovative and sustainable tourism ecosystem. Therefore, 2021 is a year of new beginnings, a year in which the pandemic will hopefully subside, but even more importantly, a year of strategic planning and reform of the Croatian tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Minister Nikolina Bernets. And now we will we will continue with the panelist session. But before continue on to the panelist session, I would like to emphasize, I think that there are still questions that are not being answered. And after the panelist session, there will be again a Q&A session. We will have opportunity to answer it. And also one very important thing for people from abroad, there will be a translator, simultaneous translator all the time. So please, we encourage you all to stay with us till the end of this webinar. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce my colleague Neda to welcome Neda, and please you can introduce your panelists. And those panelists are from the region, and Neda will give you more details.
Neda, we can't hear you.
Unfortunately, my colleague Neda has some technical issues, but we can continue with our panelists. So, first panelist is Rujana Bušić-Srpak from the Tourist Board of the Vukovar-Srijem County. Hello, dobar dan, Rujana. I don't hear you. Mute.
Dobar dan, pozdrav svima.
Dobar dan. Dobar dan. Dobar dan i dobrodošli. Drago mi je da ste nam došli ovdje, da ćemo podijeliti s vama vaše iskustvo i vaše cijenjeno mišljenje.
Hvala na pozivu.
Samo trenutak, molim vas da provjerim, naša kolegica Neda će nam se pridružiti i preuzeti riječ.
Evo, Neda je konačno sjela u direktorsku fotelju.
Prilika,
nešto nije bilo u redu sa opremom u velikoj dvorani, pa evo možda ovo je sigurno i meni lakše i intimnije. Ne znam do kud ste došli sa predstavljanjem panela, ali evo ako onda ja možda mogu iz početka, znači kao prvo Rujana Bušić-Srpak, direktorica Turističke zajednice Vukovarsko-srijemske županije, dugogodišnji spiritus movens razvoja turizma kontinentalne Hrvatske. Pa onda dr. Marko Koščak, ako možete mahnut.
Dobar dan, dobar dan.
Dobar dan. Profesor na Fakultetu za turizam Sveučilišta u Mariboru u Sloveniji. Zatim dr. Almir Peštek.
Dobar dan.
Profesor na Ekonomskom fakultetu Sveučilišta u Sarajevu, Bosna i Hercegovina. Gospodin Emil Kukalj, direktor turističke organizacije Bar, Sjadranske obale Crne Gore. I ponovno iz Hrvatske gospodin Joško Stela, direktor turističke zajednice Splitsko-dalmatinske županije i predstavnik Jadranske Hrvatske. Joško, vi ste već govorili, ali evo ako možete još... Da, evo, znači, kao što vidite, jako mi je drago da imamo tako široku međunarodnu publiku danas. I kao što vidite, naši panelisti dolaze iz zemalja koje prema regionalizaciji Svjetske turističke organizacije pripadaju mikroregiji Južna Europa, Mediteran, a koja je turistički najrazvijeniji i najviše saturiran dio ne samo Europe, nego svijeta i regiji koja je između ostalog izuzetno ovisna o turizmu. Teme različitih pritisaka turizma, odnosno te neuravnoteženosti između ekonomskih koristi i okolišno-društvenih troškova turizma itekako su prisutni ovdje već godinama. Međutim, između i unutar zemalja koje predstavljaju panelisti postoje značajne razlike u intenzitetu turizma. Destinacije uz Jadransku obalu turistički su već vrlo razvijene i itekako su izložene snažnom pritisku, posebno sezonskog turizma. Dok destinacije u kontinentalnim dijelovima tipično su u ranijim fazama turističkog razvoja i koncentrirane na iznalaženje svog mjesta na turističkom tržištu. Ali usudila bih se reći da bez obzira na razlike u toj razini postojeće turističke razvijenosti, zaokret prema održivom razvoju turizma preokupira sve nas danas okupljene na ovom panelu. Naši strateški razvojni dokumenti u turizmu od nacionalne do lokalne razine počivaju na konceptu održivosti. Jednako tako i ovdje se naravno u zadnjih godinu dana jako puno piše o post-covid fazi turizma i učestala su stručna mišljenja koja se iznose u medijima, u mnoštvu članaka, da je kriza izazvana pandemijom u stvari prilika za promjene prema boljem turizmu. A s druge strane, itekako su relevantni stavovi širokog spektra dionika u turizmu, pri čemu su te razlike u intenzitetu turističke aktivnosti među ovdje prisutnim destinacijama, one uvjetuju o tome što dionici smatraju boljim turizmom, što se smatraju novim prilikama, pa i samo razumijevanje održivosti turizma može biti bitno drugačije između destinacija koje su ovdje predstavljene. Stoga mislim da pred nama je jedna zanimljiva diskusija i u svjetlu ovih prezentacija koje smo imali prilike čuti, u svjetlu modela o kojima se ovdje govorilo, voljela bih da svi zajedno prodiskutiramo u dva kruga, u stvari da govorimo o dva temeljna, da odgovorimo na dva temeljna pitanja, da kako iz vaše perspektive i iz vaših iskustava, vaših destinacija. Znači, prvo pitanje ili ono set potpitanja u stvari je kako dionici iz vašeg iskustva shvaćaju održivi turizam? Što je realnost na terenu? Odnosno, kakve su pritiscima turizma izložene vaše destinacije iz kojih dolazite i kad imate na umu tu kompleksnu strukturu dionika koji čine turističku destinaciju, od nositelja vlasti, od turističkih poduzeća, malih poduzetnika, javnog sektora do nevladinog sektora i naravno stanovništva, koliko oni shvaćaju održivi turizam i koliko su zainteresirani za promjene postojećeg modela turističkog razvoja i koji je sadržaj tih promjena? Gospodine Stela, da li bi vi probili led?
Može.
Pa vi dolazite iz Splitsko-dalmatinske županije, kao što svi već znadu, jedne od jadranskih županija koja ima najdinamičnije stope rasta turizma u protekloj dekadi. I što je razvoj turizma donio i kako po pitanju održivosti diše lokalna zajednica?
Evo ovako, dakle, mi smo stavili jedan od glavnih strateških ciljeva da bude održivi turistički razvoj uz maksimalno povećanje kvaliteta života lokalne zajednice u našem glavnom master planu. Dakle, odmah smo se odredili za održivi razvoj, da nam to bude prioritet i da to ne bude samo mrtvo slovo na papiru. Mi smo napravili, koristeći Institut za turizam, naravno studiju prihvatnih kapaciteta na području Splitsko-dalmatinske županije, upravo sa ciljem ovoga što vi pričate, da vidimo gdje su nam problemi u održivom razvoju i da li imamo overturizam u našoj županiji. I došli smo do informacije da nismo u overturizmu, ali imamo 10% prostora, to je bilo u najboljoj godini, ta je bila 18. Da imamo negdje 10% prostora za, govorimo o samom srcu sezone, ne govorimo o 7. ni 8. mjesecu. Ali isto tako smo došli do zanimljivih informacija koje vi sad upravo pitate, kakvo je razmišljanje javnosti i subjekata koji su uključeni u turizam. Dakle, privatni iznajmljivači i ljudi koji su uključeni u turizam u područjima gdje je na prvu ruku saturiranost turizmom velika, oni su zadovoljni turizmom, zato jer zarađuju od turizma. A kad se gleda sa strane, izgleda da je to preopterećenost kapaciteta. Dakle, kao rekao gospodin jedan u prijašnjem izlaganju, dakle, nisu baš svi ti stavovi najobjektivniji. Dosta su subjektivni, dosta se odnose na to kako ovaj subjekt se snalazi u tim, da li on preferira na neki način da li će više zaraditi ili da li će biti održivi turizam. Ono što smo otkrili je da mi kao destinacija svake godine smo, kad su bile najbolje godine, 11% rasli. I ono što je bitno za naglasiti, dakle, imamo problem u komunalnoj i prometnoj infrastrukturi najveći, nešto sa radnom snagom, ali kao što ste sami rekli, najveći problem je upravo u doživljavanju, dakle, potreba za održanje razvoja. Dakle, najviše imamo, recimo, na neki način bune na području Splita i još nekim područjima, zato jer tamo imamo veliki broj ljudi koji se ne bavi turizmom, a osjeća posljedice turizma. Dok u destinacijama kao što je Hvar, Makarska, svi se bave turizmom i svi su spremni malo pretrpjeti i gužve i svega ostaloga. Međutim, idemo kao i sve ostale destinacije prema toj točki gdje ćemo biti presaturirani. Zato je održivi turizam nužnost. Nije to opcija uopće. Ako želimo kvalitetni i uopće jedan konkurentni turizam, on mora biti održiv. Dakle, nema druge varijante. Sad, drugi dio pitanja što vi pitate, neću vam biti optimističan, jer ja sam isto razmišljao kao vi, sad je kriza, sad je prilika da uhvatimo održivi turizam, međutim, nama u ovoj krizi nedostaje sugovornika za održivi turizam. Dakle, ljudi samo se žele vratiti na staro. Govorimo sad otvoreno, nećemo okolo kole. Dakle, ljudi se žele vratiti na staro i to je problem u ovoj situaciji. Dakle, nama ovdje nedostaje jedan kvalitetan motiv. Ja znam da je nama, teoretičarima i praktičarima, neki su teoretičari, neki praktičarima, zgodno je sad reći, sad je prilika, idemo to ugrabiti. Ali kako ćete ljude motivirati? Dakle, pravi upit je kako ljude motivirati u ovoj situaciji kad gube tlo pod noga da razmišljaju o održivom turizmu. Oni sad razmišljaju o bilo kakvom turizmu.
Evo, hvala Joško. Ako ovo su stvarno realne teme, da li će u stvari održivost pasti u drugi plan? Gospodine Kukalj, vi također dolazite sa intenzivno korištene Jadranske obale Crne Gore. Kakvo je iskustvo u Crnoj Gori u Baru? Kako se na ove teme gleda kod vas?
Evo, hvala vam prije svega na pozivu da učestvujem na ovoj panel diskusiji. Zaista mi je zadovoljstvo biti sa svim ovim ljudima koji su zaista pokazali visok stepen znanja iz oblasti turizma. Pa evo, ja bi se definitivno složio sa kolegom Joškom vezano za njegove stavove. Prije svega, prije ove krize sa COVID-om svima su nam bila puna usta održivosti. Mi u Crnoj Gori imamo i tu strategiju održivog razvoja i naša strategija razvoja turizma do 2020. je bila prije svega bazirana na održivom turizmu. Međutim, u praksi to nije bilo tako. Kao što je i kolega Joško rekao, taj interes za profitom, zaradom je bio prevashodni motiv ljudi da rade u turizmu. Ta održivost je nekako uvijek se pominjala, međutim uvijek je bila u nekom drugom planu. Dakle, prije svega je postojao motiv za dodatnom zaradom, profitom, dok je ta održivost u nekom drugom planu bila. Ono što ja lično smatram da je ta održivost neminovnost i neophodnost za dalji razvoj turizma, vidim je prije svega kroz neka 3 načela, a to je ta ekološka održivost, ekonomska i društvena održivost. To su, da kažem, neka načela koja prije svega smatram da se moraju poštovati u budućem razvoju turizma. Opet, drugi dio pitanja koji se odnosi da li mi imamo sagovornike na ovu temu u našoj turističkoj privredi, pa mislim da prije COVID-a smo mogli i sa jednim brojem njih da razgovaramo na ovu temu i jedan broj njih, prije svega onih međunarodnih investitora koji su prisutni u Crnoj Gori, su razumjeli šta znači održivost na dugoročni period. Međutim, vjerujem kao i u čitavoj regiji, kod nas je značaj, kada govorimo o strukturi smještenih kapaciteta, prije svega imamo jedan nepovoljan odnos individualnog u odnosu na kolektivni smještaj i prije svega kod tih predstavnika ne možemo govoriti o nekoj, da kažem, dugoročnoj strategiji, odnosno oni nemaju dugoročnu viziju razvoja održivog turizma, već prije svega su orijentisani na neke, da kažem, kratkoročne benefite od turizma kroz veći broj noćenja, dolazaka, odnosno kroz veći profit. Da li ćemo u ovom periodu uspjeti da tu održivost postavimo u prvi plan, čisto sumnjam, međutim ono što nam možda u neku ruku ide, da kažem, na našu vodenicu je to što vjerujem da ove godine i vjerovatno sljedećih godina nećemo imati taj broj dolazaka kao u rekordnim godinama, što će, edo da kažem, biti, da kažemo tako, neka sreća u nesreći za kada je vezano, kada govorimo o održivosti turizma, te sa te strane nećemo imati toliki pritisak na infrastrukturu, a opet kažem, kad govorimo o infrastrukturi, tu prije svega mislim na komunalnu infrastrukturu, saobraćajnu i također ono što je prisutno u cijeloj regiji, to je nedostatak kvalitetne radne snage, ali opet s obzirom na predviđanja za oporavak turizma, vjerujem da će taj pritisak u narednih godinu do dvije biti manji nego što je bio u prethodnom periodu. Tako da definitivno da će broj dolazaka uticati na to da u nekom dijelu budemo održivija destinacija i ja se iskreno nadam da će to doprinijeti tome da prije svega privrednici u turizmu počnu razmišljati na jedan drugačiji način u odnosu na prošlost.
Puno hvala, kolega Kukalj. Evo, ja bi se sad okrenula gospodinu, odnosno doktoru Pešteku. Vi ste nekako između dva svijeta, znači s jedne strane Neum, opet Jadranska obala, itekako turistički važan i bitno mjesto, bitna destinacija. S druge strane, možda drugi dijelovi, kontinentalni dijelovi Bosne i Hercegovine su pak u drugoj situaciji. Pa kako iz te perspektive, te dvojake perspektive, da tako kažem, možete komentirati ovu temu uopće razumijevanja održivosti?
Da, hvala na pitanju. Koristim priliku također da se zahvalim za priliku za učešće na panelu i webinaru. Ja ću pokušati da ukratko elaboriram situaciju u Bosni i Hercegovini, imajući u vidu kompleksnu situaciju u političkom, odnosno administrativnom smislu, koja značajno utiče na samo poimanje i implementaciju aktivnosti koje su vezane za održivi razvoj. Kad govorimo o održivom razvoju turizmu, mislim da taj termin lagano tek uvodimo u upotrebu. Dosadašnje iskustvo, govorimo o pre-COVID periodu, pokazuje da je fokus uglavnom bio na ekonomskim efektima razvoja turizma, a značajno su zanemareni aspekti društvenog razvoja i okolinskog razvoja. Samo za ilustraciju reći ću da se Bosna i Hercegovina prema TNT indeksu Svjetskog ekonomskog foruma za 2019. godinu nalazi na samom začelju zemalja po zaštiti prirodnih resursa. Mi smo dakle daleko iza zemalja i regije, a posebno bih tu istakao i Crnu Goru i Sloveniju i Hrvatsku, dakle značajno zaostajemo u tom smislu. Osim ovog okolinskog aspekta, značajno je zanemaren i ovaj aspekt društvenog razvoja, jer turizam pravi veliki pritisak i na društvo, a naravno i, kako sam već rekao, i na okoliš. Mada, s druge strane, prema jednom istraživanju koje smo radili 2018. na 2019. godinu, lokalno stanovništvo značajno podržava razvoj turizma i vidi puno više pozitivnih efekata, razvojnih efekata turizma nego ovih negativnih aspekata koji se tiču recimo rasta cijena nekretnina, troškova života, kvaliteta života i tako dalje. Ipak postoji dakle pozitivan stav lokalnog stanovništva za razvoj turizma. Međutim, prema tom istom istraživanju, a naravno i mnogim istraživanjima koje smo radili, koji baš oslikavaju situaciju BiH, stanovništvo, ali također i biznisi nisu zadovoljni u potpunosti s onim što rade lokalne zajednice i institucije vlasti na višem nivou u smislu upravljanja turizmom kao sistemom. To je stvar jedan od najvećih problema s kojim se Bosna i Hercegovina suočava, koji je rezultat političkih, odnosno administrativnih podjela. Znate da imamo dva entiteta koji faktički imaju dva pristupa razvoju turizmu, Republika Srpska i Federacija. Onda se situacija u Federaciji dodatno usložnjava sa organizacijom kantona i onda tu naravno imamo i opštine, odnosno lokalne zajednice koje su značajan faktor. I ono što meni daje nadu za budućnost, što je stvari jedan pozitivan trend koji se pokazao prije COVID-a, nadam se da će i nakon COVID-a taj pozitivni zaokret, nazovimo ga tako, strateški zaokret, je da lokalne zajednice preuzimaju sve veću ulogu u stvari upravljanju turističkim aktivnostima, odnosno kreiranju lokalnih politika, razvojnih politika, uključujući turizam i na taj način prave taj strateški zaokret koji je nama jako potreban. Rekao sam da na početku da je fokus na ekonomskim aspektima turizma međutim Bosna i Hercegovina je jako daleko od ostvarenja punog potencijala u razvoju. Mi smo, dakle, kada pričamo o turizmu, svi su sretni, raste broj turista i tako dalje, međutim, taj rast turista je, rasta dolazaka broja turista i sve ove pozitivne stvari koje se u tom kontekstu dešavaju su uglavnom rezultat privatne inicijative. Mi imamo jako malo saradnju između javnog i privatnog sektora. A što je još interesantnije, privatni sektor ne sarađuje dovoljno da bi ostvarili efekte. I opet što jeste problem koji se reflektuje, koji je rezultat u stvari ovoga što sam već rekao, u mnogome razvoj turizma nije strateška stvar. Dakle, mi nemamo strategiju razvoja turizma na različitim nivoima. Ne bih sada da detaljšem, to zahtijeva puno više vremena. I ono što se pokazuje između ostalog kao rezultat svega toga je visoka koncentracija turističkih aktivnosti na određenim destinacijama. Dakle, imamo, što ste vi u stvari spomenuli kroz Neum i recimo kontinentalni dio Bosne i Hercegovine, imamo situaciju, recimo kada govorimo o Federaciji BiH, mada je slično i u Republici Srpskoj, da recimo Sarajevo, Mostar i Neum generišu negdje oko 75% turističkih aktivnosti u Bosni i Hercegovini. Stoga ja Bosnu i Hercegovinu smatram, i to često ističem, zemljom neispričanih priča. I nadam se da je ovaj šok izazvan pandemijom će nam otvoriti malo oči, jer nam je pokazao svu nesavršenost sistema sa kojim smo bili suočeni i nadam se da ćemo u budućnosti, u post-covid eri, razmišljati potpuno drugačije i više govoriti o konceptu održivog turizma.
Hvala vam puno. Nekad biti na početku je u stvari dobro, jer se može učiti na greškama drugih.
Da, baš tako.
S druge strane, svako dijete se voli samo opeći.
Tako, slažem.
Evo, ja bih sad zamolila gospođu Bušić-Srpak da se uključi. Naime, evo, ja sam već spomenula vašu pionirsku ulogu u stvari u dugogodišnju u turističkom razvoju jedne vrlo neturističke regije. U biti možemo govoriti o cijeloj kontinentalnoj Hrvatskoj, ali zanima me, evo, da li su i koliko su i na koji način su ove teme o održivosti turizma i izazovima turizma prisutne u Slavoniji?
Lijepi pozdrav svima. Napravili ste zapravo, gospođo Delešman-Košuta, dobar prijelaz iz jedne turističke preko poluturističke, recimo to tako, regije do jedne netipične turističke regije kao što je zapravo Slavonija i Vukovarsko-srijemska županija iz koje sama dolazim. Počeli smo s mojim kolegom Stelom koji je zapravo jedan turistički svijet u Hrvatskoj, a evo sad smo kod mene koja sam u jednom drugom turističkom svijetu iste te Hrvatske, dakle na nekakvih 350 km od prelijepe hrvatske obale živimo jedan sasvim drugi svijet i u dobrim i u lošim danima. Dakle, kako se razlikujemo u vremenima kada je sve normalno, staro normalno, tako se razlikujemo i u ovim problematičnim i teškim vremenima. Što se tiče održivosti, i ta održivost je naravno različita. Mi nemamo iste probleme na temu održivosti kao naše kolege s obale, ali osobno to smatram kao velikom prilikom i šansom uopće za jačanje konkurentnosti ovog dijela Hrvatske na turističkom tržištu i ta održivost se prije svega odnosi na investicije u ekološke obnovljive izvore energije, u jedan sasvim drugi pristup turizmu za koji mi imamo priliku. Dakle, što bi rekli, kod nas nije svako zlo za zlo, neko je zlo i za dobro, tako da nepostojanje tog visokog pritiska broja dolazaka i noćenja na ovom području zapravo ostavlja prostora kreiranju jednog sasvim drugačijeg tipa proizvoda, ponude i suživota. Ono što treba istaknuti kod netipičnih turističkih destinacija je činjenica koja se ne treba i neće promijeniti, a to je da turizam nije primarna gospodarska djelatnost ovog dijela Hrvatske. Tako treba i ostati. Turizam jeste i treba ojačati kao dodatna gospodarska djelatnost i dodatni sektor primarnim djelatnostima od kojih ljudi u ovom dijelu Hrvatske žive. U tom smislu turizam se upravo u ovim prostorima manifestira kroz svoju socijalnu, društvenu, kulturnu dimenziju i mislim da je to ono što je i na nacionalnoj razini iznimno važno. Dakle, komunikacija našeg identiteta, naših tradicijskih vrijednosti, naše prepoznatljivosti na nekakvoj europskoj, kulturnoj, turističkoj sceni je zapravo nešto što se može manifestirati kroz turizam, prvenstveno na korisnost lokalnog stanovništva. To je zapravo jedan sasvim drugi pristup, neću reći problemu, nego području, recimo, održivosti u turizmu. I još bih samo dodala u kontekstu svih prezentacija koje su bile iznimno zanimljive i jedna zanimljivija od druge, da zapravo COVID i cijelu ovu situaciju sa pandemijom ne bih koristila kao izliku za uopće promišljanje održivosti. Održivost u destinacijama koje imaju još 10% prostora za rast ili recimo Dubrovnik koji možda nema više uopće ili kolega Kukalj iz Bara, čini mi se, tako je. Dakle, o tome se trebalo razmišljati, razmišljalo se i ranije i to je odgovornost koju ne bih vezala uz COVID, nego je to naprosto odgovornost svih nas turističkih djelatnika za budućnost prostora u kojem živimo. Mi smo dakle došli do trenutka kada se ne možemo raspregnuti više nego što jesmo, a konkretno u Hrvatskoj u kojoj volimo zapravo raspravljati o cjelogodišnjem turizmu, zapravo imamo priliku cjelogodišnji turizam proširiti, da tako kažem, upravo na netipične turističke destinacije, iskoristiti puni potencijal naše obale, ali iskoristiti u tom smislu puni potencijal i našeg kontinenta na ukupnu korisnost hrvatskog turizma. I to je jedan proces koji definitivno ima svoje konekcije, da tako kažem, i sa održivošću i nešto na čem trebamo kontinuirano raditi i mislim da COVID neće značajno pridonijeti promišljanju o tome, promišljamo li o tome ili ne. Upravo je to i kolega Stela potvrdio u svom uvodnom izlaganju i prvoj rečenici da zapravo ljudi u ovoj teškoj krizi samo žele preživjeti, a ni sada ne razmišljaju o održivosti. Prema tome, a održivost je condicio sine qua non uopće održivosti života u određenom prostoru. Dakle, turizam treba biti na korisnost prije svega lokalnog stanovništva, a potom i svih posjetitelja, kod jednih na jedan način, a kod drugih na drugi. Evo, toliko. Hvala vam.
Super, puno hvala. Ja bih sad prešla opet na jednu dualnu destinaciju, odnosno na doktora Koščaka. Opet Slovenija, vrlo izražena turistička aktivnost na obali, pa opet i vjerojatno razvijeniji kontinentalni turizam nego na ostalim destinacijama ovdje prisutnima, a ujedno tako i destinaciji koje evo vidjeli smo na ovom, kako se to zvao, indeks održivosti od Euromonitora na 10. mjestu među top 10. Pa evo, iz perspektive zelene Slovenije, koja se tako i pozicionira na tržištu, gdje ste danas, kako se ove teme gledaju, odnosno koliko se teme održivosti diskutiraju, gledaju u Sloveniji danas?
Dobar dan, hvala institutu na pruženoj prilici da međusobno podijelimo svoje iskustva na ovu temu. Vezano za ovaj rezultat, 10. mjesto, ja sam pratio 2 strelice koji su istodobno rekle da smo malo pali, znači uvijek kad počneš da dobiješ nagrade i onako istačeš se, imaš znači i puno rada da napraviš. Ali tu smo iz perspektive održivosti i odgovornosti slovenskog turizma u zadnjih nekoliko godina apsolutno mogu reći da je bilo dosta pozitivnih pomaka. A jedan od najvažnijih bila je takozvana zelena schema slovenskog turizma, koji je u biti certifikacijski program razvijen na nacionalnoj razini, komuniciran sa dionicima na lokalu, sa namjerom da poveže sve napore za održivi i odgovorni razvoj turizma. Preko ove certifikacijske scheme destinacije, turistički provajderi i ostali dionici, na primjer zaštićena područja kao što je Triglavski nacionalni park, valoriziraju i usmeravaju svoje mjere za promociju, kako ste rekli, zelene Slovenije. Ja mislim da se ta prepoznavnost na kraju krajeva odrazila možda i na toj tablici, ali kako sam rekao, ima puno da se radi još. Ja bih rekao odaziv, pogotovo u našem slučaju, jer mi nemamo neke međurazine, imamo nacionalnu i lokalnu, nemamo recimo županija, kantona, kako ste pomenuli, je dobar na lokalnoj razini. Trenutno u schemi je oko 60 destinacija koji su certificirani, reći ću kakvi su problemi iza toga, po meni barem, oko 50 smještajnih kapaciteta, 4 zaštićena parka, 2 turističke agencije i jedna turistička atrakcija, ako hoćete, Klet brda kao jedna najpoznatija vinska destinacija. Dakle, treba naglasiti da postoje i druge međunarodne sheme koje su uključeni ostali dionici i to po meni je apsolutno vrijedno kao nekakav nacionalni paket, znači to je prihvaćeno i tu apsolutno mislim da smo napravili dobar korak naprijed. Na drugoj strani i mi u Sloveniji se suočavamo sa različitim pritiscima, izazovima koji su pomenuti, možda čak i nekad zbog nekonsistentne prostorne politike, odsutnosti strateških prostornih planova, odnosno njihove zloupotrebe i nekih parcijalnih interesa, možda zbog gradnje velikih infrastruktura i tako dalje, i tako često dolazi do nekih konfliktnih situacija u prostoru, pogotovo trpi Natura 2000 koja je jedna od najvećih potencijala za ruralni razvoj u smislu Slovenije. Mi smo naime 1991. godine počeli složeno da radimo na ruralnom razvoju i to se u svakom slučaju, ja bih rekao, sada ti rezultati se vide. I isto tako sam mišljenja da naša lokalna razmišljanja i razmišljanja lokalnih dionika u tim turističkim destinacijama je apsolutno razvijeno puno više u smislu razumijevanja potrebe po održivošću i odgovornim razvojem. Ima sve više lokalnih inicijativa koje se bore, ako hoćete, za svoja područja, za svoja prava i nekako da umještaju svoje prioritete, a pogotovo tu je turizam visoko na agendi razvoja. I ja bi u svakom slučaju istaknuo neke od njih, jer se čini da je pogotovo ta lokalna razina najbolji dokaz da se mogu destinacije, kao što su recimo Solčavsko, Logarsko dolina, Bohinj, Brda, Dolenjska sa zidanicima, i u ovakvim godinama kao što je bila prošla 2020, znači COVID godina, dobro odraziti na turističkom tržištu. Naime, sve ovo što sam pomenuo je sa plus rezultatima na prijašnju sezonu. Sa 10-20% povećanom prihodu, ali u svakom slučaju istodobno, kako ste rekli, obala, Bled, Ljubljana, koji su fokusirani na nekakav drugačiji produkt, imale su velike probleme. I ja bih rekao iz vidika onoga što će biti ključno, a čuli smo nešto od ovoga od kolega ujutro, u postkoronskom periodu bit će vrlo važno da će destinacije znati ponuditi doživljaje i nove iskustva u zelenom okruženju, od masovne posjete udaljene destinacije, osiguravati opću i osobnu higijenu za goste te svih sigurnosnih mjera, to je jedan od velikih inicijativa koje trenutno naši hoteli rade, osiguravanju socijalne distance na lokaciji, ponude očuvanog okoliša i tako dalje, i sa dodatkom da u prvi fazi posle pandemije ciljanje tržišta iz obližnjih turističkih destinacija. I da završim, ako bi me pitali prije godinu dana kako održivost nakon pandemije, ja bih rekao, evo, bilo nam je nešto poslato od gore, pa da nas je presjeklo, pa da možda imamo sad priliku da razmislimo. Evo, pomenuti je i problem overturizma. Moje je mišljenje da je najviše odgovornosti za taj problem na lošem menadžmentu i neadekvatnom upravljanju u turističkoj destinaciji. tu leži najveći dio problema, ja bih htio to da glasno kažem. I ako me pitate sada, poslije godinu dana tog covida, nisam više uvjeren da je održivost u prvom planu. Nažalost, vidimo, a razumijem sve ovo što su rekli kolege iz Bara, Joško, iz Splita, da to je realnost situacije, da pitamo se i o realnosti i mogućnosti sagledavanja nekih alternativa. Dakle, da li nas ovo što svakodnevno vidimo za Uskrs, ovaj, da kažem, očajna, skoro nasilna ponuda nekih masovnih itinerara može postaviti u pozitivnu konotaciju budućnosti. Ja se bojim da smo zbog one ugodnosti koje smo navikli u prošlim godinama nevoljni da u stvari sami kod sebe najprije raščistimo hoćemo li da se ponašamo održivo i nije to najoptimističniji nagoveštaj. I stvarnost točka, ako neko želi više na ovu temu, pošto su jutro kolege, ja sam pravio sa kolegama iz Škotske istraživanje, ako neko želi, voljan sam ponuditi i publikaciju koju smo napravili, pa slobodno kontaktirajte poslije ovoga. Hvala, možda sam bio malo duži, ali bit ću kraći u drugom dijelu.
Malo ste već nagovijestili sljedeće pitanje, no međutim, evo, očito je da ova tema održivosti sad u ovoj kratkoročnoj post-covid fazi će pasti u drugi, možda treći plan. I čini mi se da smo mi još uvijek u nekom procesu, kad gledamo i dugoročno, ovo je u stvari dugoročna tema, da smo u nekom procesu 2 koraka napred, 1 nazad, pa 2 napred, pa 1 nazad. I da očito će biti potrebno puno više svekolike komunikacije, da tako kažem, da se u stvari održivost razumije i krene razumijevati ne kao neprijatelj rasta ili kao ograničenje zarade i ekonomskih koristi od turizma, već jedno uvođenje ravnoteže. Čini mi se isto iz svega što se reklo, da u biti će te opterećene jadranske destinacije koje će sigurno i dalje biti glavni cilj dolaska turista i tu će se bilježiti najveće brojke, moći učiti nešto od kontinenta, a ne obrnuto. Pa ja bih sad, evo, vi ste gospodin Koščak već i ušli u stvari u neke teme, u stvari sljedećeg pitanja koje sam vam željela postaviti, a to je koliko su u stvari razvijeni alati u našim destinacijama za taj pomak kao održivosti. Koliko su razvijeni ili koji su to alati koje bi trebali, ili mehanizmi ako hoćete, koje bi trebali razvijati da bi se ostvarili pomaci kao održivost. Vi ste govorili nešto o prostornom aspektu, govorili ste o ovoj zelenoj certifikacijskoj šemi, ali kad sad imate na umu možda i šire alate koji su nam na raspolaganju, od upravljanja, od tog suradničkog upravljanja koje je bilo spomenuto u prezentacijama, od mjerenja utjecaja, gdje smo danas i na šta treba staviti naglasak. I evo, gospodin Koščak, ako bi mogli početi sa vama, s obzirom da ste inicirali tu temu.
Evo, kad sam već zagrijen. Evo, ja bih samo za uvod još komentirao. Ja mislim da prije svega suradnja između kontinenta i obale je odgovor, ovo što je koleginica Bušić-Srpak isto pomenula, za mnoge probleme koje imamo vezano za, ali tu je samo naša volja, hoćemo ili nećemo. Ali dobro, ostavimo to. Što se mene tiče, ja razumijem odgovornost za promjene kao zajedničku odgovornost, vjerovatno u obliku nekakvog javnog privatnog partnerstva, odnosno u smjeru onih dionika koji su u destinaciji. I tu mora biti dio reakcije odgovornih DMO-a. Nažalost, u Sloveniji mi nemamo baš najbolja iskustva na području destinacijskog menadžmenta, možda i zbog veličine. Tržište hoće i svakako ostaje diktirati trendove, ali odgovornost DMO je zajedno sa lokalnim stanovništvom da imaju ključnu riječ i glas. Tu oni trebaju preuzeti tu odgovornost. Dakle, zajedničko, suradničko upravljanje destinacijom u Sloveniji još uvijek je izazov, pogotovo zbog kritične mase dionika koji se djeluju. I mi imamo naime veoma male destinacije. Slovenija trenutačno radi na 4 makroregije, možda 1-2 nekih regionalnih, odnosno povezanih općina, a sve ostalo je lokalna sfera. Lokalni zavodi koji upravljaju turizam, evo po izvoru ja sam provjerio na nacionalnoj razini evidentiranih je oko 60 nekakvih lokalnih turističkih institucija, od kojih 35 radi, aktivnih je. Za zemlju od 2 miliona previše. Ovo ne može, nije robustno, ne može da ima kritičnu masu dionika koji može omogućiti održivost u svim oblicima. To je jedan od izazova koji mislim da mi imamo. Što se tiče mehanizma, odnosno upravljanja destinacije, i tu smo još uvijek sa mnogo prilika da se ispravimo, nemamo i premalo je zbog te razdrobljenosti, stručnosti, ekspertize i kadrovske pothranjenosti u tim institucijama lokalnim i na kraju krajeva, kako hoćete, i razumijevanja tajni suvremenog destinacijskog menadžmenta. Uvijek se pozivamo na premalo financija, ok, to će biti uvijek izazov. Da li možemo, a nemamo organizirano praćenje, odnosno monitoring na lokalnoj razini skoro nikakav, imamo nešto na nacionalnoj razini i pratimo neke jasno trendove, ali opet tu zbog premale robustnosti teško je pravovremeno odreagirati na lokalu, na liniji direktnog kontakta sa gostima. Mogu samo još dodati, i to je vezano za sustav podrške, da je bilo sa strane Vlade Republike Slovenije 2020. znači prošla godina, djelomično spašena turistička sezona zbog tih vaučera, znači domaći gost je spasio sezonu i po meni nikad ne zaboravimo na domaćeg gosta jer on će biti uvijek i najlojalniji. I kad krenemo da gledamo neke udaljene destinacije, Intercontinental, ja ne vjerujem da se ono može povratiti u onakvom mobilu brzo kako je bilo. Dakle, a sve ostalo i slovenski turizam pati od tih sustavnih podrški na svim razinama i tu ostaje i budućnost da pokaže na koji način da to odradimo najbolje. To je toliko. Hvala.
Hvala vam puno. Slušajući vas, čini mi se da ima još puno prostora u stvari u Sloveniji da obrani tu svoju marketinšku možda ipak više poziciju zelene Slovenije.
Apsolutno, hvala.
To je bilo jako informativno i čestitke na jako dobroj podlozi.
Hvala, to sam namjerno stavio jer ja vjerujem u ovo.
Eto, hvala vam. Ja bi sad ponovno prešla na gospodina Pešteka kada govorimo evo o tim mehanizmima za održivo upravljanje. Koji su izazovi iz perspektive Bosne i Hercegovine?
Izazova je jako puno. Ja ću pokušati da identifikujem samo neke na koje sam se dijelom referirao i u prvom dijelu. Prvenstveno naš problem je odsustvo destinacijskog menadžmenta. Dakle, na različitim nivoima, lokalni, regionalni i nacionalni. Prvenstveno se turizmom bave entiteti, dakle 2 entiteta koji, to su Republika Srpska i Federacija BiH, koji naravno imaju svoju regulativu, svoju stratešku orijentaciju. Govorimo o Republici Srpskoj Federaciji, recimo nema recimo zakon o turizmu, a recimo nema ni strategiju razvoja turizma. Što se onda reflektuje u federaciji na niže nivoje, kantone koji također imaju svoje neke pristupe i tako dalje. Dakle, u tom nekom sistemu mi nemamo dobro upravljanje. A znamo kada ne znamo gdje želimo ići, onda nas svaki put može odvesti tamo. Tako da je to jedan od velikih problema u kombinaciji sa onim što bih ja i posebno istakao, a to je problem sive ekonomije. Jedan od velikih problema da zaista s kojim se mi suočavamo je siva ekonomija. I dovoljno je recimo pogledati zvanične statistike, dovoljno je pogledati recimo o smještajnim kapacitetima i pogledati recimo podatke sa booking.com i dovoljno je jasno. Dakle, na taj način sa prisutnom sive ekonomije koja se već dugi niz godina pojavljuje i održava, mi zaista gubimo prostor za efikasnije djelovanje. S druge strane, ono što najbolje ilustruje situaciju i u kontekstu održivosti i razvoja turizma u Bosni i Hercegovini je TNT indeks Svjetskog ekonomskog foruma. Dakle, ono što nama treba definitivno je da uzmemo podatke i počnemo raditi otklanjate sve te nedostatke. Dakle, mi smo 105 i 140 zemalja, daleko smo naravno i za Hrvatske, i za Slovenije, i Crne Gore, i mislim da tu postoji puno djelovanja, ali potrebna je i određena volja, naravno, da se konačno počnu rješavati stvari. Ja čisto kažem, korona će proći, međutim, poslije korone će nama ostati veliki niz problema koji stiču na ukupno vođenje biznesa, odnosno taj biznes, nama treba dakle tourism enabling environment i business enabling environment. Taj business enabling environment je zaista komplikovan i on predstavlja veliki problem za jedan uspješan razvoj biznisa koji bi onda u kooperaciji sa javnim sektorom mogli da naprave određeni iskorak naprijed. Ova korona je, kako sam već ranije rekao, već jasno pokazala sve nesavršenosti sistema i mi smo imali tokom pandemije, evo, tu smo najbolje vidjeli kako ne postoji jedan uniformni pristup rješavanju tog problema. Tako da su pojedine destinacije, odnosno pojedini segmenti različito reagovali. Republika Srpska recimo imala vaučere, Federacija nije imala vaučere, a vaučer su nama bili jako potrebni i drago mi je da čujem da kolega iz Slovenije govori o tome i naravno da to se isto pokazalo i u Makedoniji i tako dalje i u Srbiji. Dakle, šta mi stvari imamo? Mi imamo problem sa sezonalnošću, imamo problem sa niskom potrošnjom, imamo kratko zadržavanje turista. I šta u stvari mi sada treba da uradimo tu? Pa mi moramo baš napraviti jedan veliki strateški zaokret. Dakle, ključna riječ koju mi treba da imamo sada je ta strategija je integracija koja sada ne postoji, kako sam već rekao nekoliko puta, ona ne postoji i potrebne su nam inovacije. Već je spomenuto od kolega i kolegica domaći turizam i tako dalje. To je također potencijal u Bosni i Hercegovini koji se slabo koristi. Tome se trebamo okrenuti jer Bosna i Hercegovina ima baš puno mogućnosti za razvoj specifičnih oblika turizma. Spomenuti samo outdoor, ruralni, zdravstveni, majs i tako dalje. Dakle, mi moramo napraviti taj neki zaokret, moramo reći da, evo, to smo imali, bili smo u tački A, sada želimo doći u tačku B i u stvari mi ne trebamo izmišljati vruću vodu, mi se trebamo, kako ste i vi rekli, voditi onim iskustvima iz regije. Ja veoma često govorim da postoji toliko dobrih primjera, toliko praksi koje možemo, nećemo ih samo kopirati, koje možemo prenijeti, koje možemo iskoristiti. Međutim, mi u tom nekom reaktivnom pristupu tržištu i zadovoljavanju s onim što sada imamo, a to je još u koroni bilo samo preživljavanje, nekako smo se uspavali i dopuštamo u stvari da se stvari dešavaju same od sebe. I to ne smijemo više raditi i nadam se da će, evo, korona otvorila je puno pitanja, da će nas sada potaknuti da kažemo da, to je bilo, naučili smo i idemo dalje, dakle, koristeći principe održivog razvoja. Ja sam i prije korone govorio i time ću i završiti da razvoj turizma u Bosni i Hercegovini za nekih 5 do 7 godina, to je bila moja procjena, se može zvati neodrživim turizmom. Baš zbog niza problema koji su se jednostavno akumulirali. Tako da, evo, krizu trebamo gledati kao rješenje, kao otvaranje očiju i jedan izazov u stvari za jedan potpuno drugačiji pristup, a mi zaista ovdje imamo puno toga da ponudimo, ljudi su jako zadovoljni, turisti koji dolaze ovdje, jako su zadovoljni s onim što viđaju, ali mi možemo puno i trebamo raditi puno više.
Hvala vam puno. Evo, ja bi se ponovno okrenula gospođi Bušić-Srpak. Znači, opet iz vaše perspektive kontinentalne Hrvatske ili konkretno Slavonije, znači stanje tih mehanizama, da tako kažem, upravljanja održivosti. Održivi turizam se očito iz svega što čujemo naravno neće desiti sam po sebi. Mislim da na kraju impulsi s tržišta nisu dovoljni, da se s time možemo složiti koliko god su važni. Ali kako su razvijeni, u kojoj mjeri su razvijeni ti drugi mehanizmi, ključni mehanizmi, znači funkcioniranje DMO-a, ako izostavimo činjenicu da nikad dovoljno novaca, nikad dovoljno financijskih sredstava, znači kako funkcioniranje DMO-a, kako izgleda to suradničko upravljanje, da li je to uopće došlo na stol? Kako izgledaju ti mehanizmi, znači, upravljanja održivim turizmom u ovom trenutku iz vaše perspektive na kontinentu, odnosno u Slavoniji?
Hvala lijepa. Pa evo, što se tiče financija, moram reći da financije nisu glavni i osnovni razlog ni razvoja, ni zaostatka u razvoju. Bitno je da ona sredstva koja imate pametno potrošite. Tako da smo samo gledali na to koliko imamo ili nemamo sredstava, ne bismo danas bili ni tu gdje jesmo. Što se tiče uopće upravljanja destinacijom, ono što ne mogu dovoljno istaknuti, a to je nužnost prihvaćanja javnog sektora privatnog i privatnog sektora javnog. Što po tim mislim? To je zapravo jedna nužna egzistencijalna ovisnost jednih od drugih. Dakle, napretka ni održivog ni neodrživog turizma nema bez razumijevanja pozicije i aktivnosti i jednih i drugih. Dakle, na konkretnom primjeru mi u turističkoj zajednici možemo osmisliti kakav god projekt želimo, svaki naš projekt zapravo završi na stolu, da tako kažem, privatnog poduzetnika, nositelja turističke ponude, on je u krajnjoj liniji napravljen za njega. Ukoliko nositelji, dakle poduzetnici, taj projekt ne prihvate, znači on ne postoji. Isto tako, svaki poduzetnik može imati savršen objekt u nesavršenoj destinaciji. Znači on je tu apsolutno zakinut. I upravo ovaj princip na kojem funkcioniramo i ova COVID vremena u kojem zapravo ovisimo jedni od drugima, gdje odgovornost jednih apsolutno utječe i na zdravlje i moje i bilo koga od nas, je zapravo nešto što se nama u turizmu događa cijelo vrijeme, ali nikako da se to osvijestimo i konkretiziramo na način da nema razvoja ukupne destinacije, ni poduzetništva, ni turizma kao sektora, ukoliko jedni ne surađujemo s drugima i ne razumijemo na pravi način poziciju jednih i drugih. Ja bih se tu nadovezala upravo u smislu održivosti na ono što je rekao gospodin Koščak, a to je domaći gost. Dakle, mi smo imali jednu situaciju u proljeće 2020. kod onog prvog lockdowna u Hrvatskoj, da se jako puno govorilo i u prvi plan stavilo naše domaće proizvođače domaće hrane, što je bilo apsolutno pozitivno. Idemo to preslikati i na domaće gosta i na domaću ponudu. Dakle, održivost lokalnog gospodarstva i lokalnog stanovništva se upravo očituje i kroz konzumaciju domaćeg turističkog proizvoda. Naravno, Hrvatska je jako velika turistička zemlja sa jako puno turističkih kapaciteta i logično je da mi ne možemo opstati samo na domaćem gostu, ali isto tako činjenica da bazen domaćeg tržišta apsolutno nismo do kraja iskoristili. Mi smo zapravo u potpunosti okrenuti u promociji na inozemnim tržištima, u promociji naših primorskih destinacija, a zapravo se promocija kontinentalnih destinacija treba odvijati na jedan sasvim drugačiji način, kroz specijalizirane proizvode, kroz vrlo konkretnu komunikaciju sadržajima i kroz zapravo poznavanje tržišta sa jednom manje poznatom, gotovo i nepoznatom Hrvatskom. Ono što je naša prednost i što može doprinijeti održivosti je to da naši sugrađani, dakle upravo stanovnici Republike Hrvatske, pa ako hoćete obližnjih zemalja, mi smo jako puno naših promotivnih aktivnosti i upravo kao klaster Slavonije, dakle za svih 5 slavonskih županija imali na tržištu Slovenije koja razumije taj proizvod kontinentalne ponude i moram reći da tu imamo dosta dobre rezultate i podatke. Mi zapravo moramo ići ka poznatom gostu, ka gostu koji otprilike ima negdje osjećaj i prvi dojam i percepciju što to može dobiti u ovom dijelu Hrvatske i ono što je iznimno važno je vrijedno za novac. Dakle, još mi se nije dogodilo da je do mene došla informacija, što ne znači da ona negdje ne postoji, da su gosti bili nezadovoljni onim što su platili u odnosu na ono što su dobili. Sve ovo što sam navela i u ovom odgovoru i u onom prvom su zapravo po meni velike prilike za jačanje lokalnog poduzetništva, za jačanje ekonomske snage uopće lokalnog stanovništva i zapravo za jednu širu sliku hrvatskog turizma u cjelini. Dakle, Hrvatska je i plava i zelena. Mi smo jedna mala zemlja, toliko prebogata raznolikošću da je to naprosto fascinantno, a isto tako i sami unutar svoje zemlje, pa ako hoćete u bližem okruženju, svi sudionici ovog panela danas su zapravo na neki način naši susjedi, zapravo ne znamo što tko od nas nudi. Tako da je prostora za razvoj, održivi razvoj na korist prije svega lokalnog stanovništva jako velik. Ja se nadam da će ova COVID kriza osvijestiti to i u percepcijama upravo onih koji krucijalno upravljaju sa turizmom na području neke zemlje. Ja moram reći da nama sva ova iskustva koje je COVID donio nisu nova, ni meni osobno, ni mojim kolegama iz klastera Slavonije. Dakle, mi smo pokušali da nas čuju zapravo sa svim tim našim porukama i stavovima i ranije, ali evo sad kad smo se zaključali, kad smo bili nužni zapravo i prisiljeni se okrenuti sami sebi, je naprosto to došlo nekako u prvi plan, ali to su, ponovit ću, činjenice koje su postojale i prije COVID-a i postojeće kao činjenice i nakon COVID-a, a nadam se da je to što prije, iako sam, moram priznati, vrlo skeptična i vrlo konzervativnih predviđanja, ali evo, moramo ohrabrivati jedni druge.
Hvala vam puno. Vraćamo se evo natrag na Jadransku obalu, lokaciju koja će očito, koja je bila i prije COVID-a, očito će poslije COVID-a opet biti izrazito turistički opterećena i u dugoročnim projekcijama će vjerojatno to isto biti tako, i gdje u stvari ta agresivnost turizma s jedne strane tjera na što brže iznalaženje rješenja i nekako hvatanja u koštac sa temama održivosti i razvijanja tih mehanizama koji nam mogu omogućiti da se ipak uhvatimo u koštac, a možda puno manje nego do sada prepustimo samim, kao što sam rekla, toj agresivnosti turizma. Pa evo, htjela sam, gospodin Kukalj, pitati vas kako u Crnoj Gori se u biti, kako funkcionira i da li ste zadovoljni, gdje vidite neke potrebe za promjenama u upravljanju destinacijama, znači DMO sustav. S druge strane, podaci o mjerenju utjecaja turizma, prostorni planovi, odnos prema prostoru, što su možda to suradničko upravljanje, znači kako stvari stoje sa tim alatima hvatanja u koštac sa održivošću.
Pa, hvala još jednom na datoj riječi. Definitivno je potrebno sistemsko upravljanje destinacijom. Upravo iz tog razloga mi smo kao najveća opština na Crnogorskom primorju i pristupili izradi strategije razvoja turizma do 2026. godine i zahvalan sam zaista kolegama sa Instituta za turizam koji su nam konsultanti na tom poslu i definitivno vidim da ćemo zaista izaći s jednim lijepim i prije svega korisnim dokumentom, planom koji će definisati budući razvoj turizma na teritoriji opštine Bar, ali u svakom slučaju, eto, negdje se to možda može i reflektovati na cijelo Crnogorsko primorje sa manjim ili većim razlikama. Uloga javnog sektora je velika, međutim, također taj pritisak privatnog sektora je i s druge strane također velik. Ono što mi ovdje u Baru radimo, to je upravo to susretno planiranje. U velikoj mjeri, barem u posljednje vrijeme, smo uključili naše lokalno i stanovništvo, ali isto i turističku privredu u proces planiranja. To je uvijek ono pitanje ko je stariji kokoš ili jaje, da li tržište određuje pravce razvoja ili smo mi koji određujemo taj pravac razvoja. U biti tržište jako puno utiče. Tražnja međunarodna prije svega jako utiče i na ponudu koja je nešto neelastičnija u odnosu na tražnju, međutim svjedoci smo toga da se jako brzo prilagođava. Naš, da kažem, doprinos tome javnog sektora mora da bude prije svega umirujući, odnosno prije svega pomirujući između tražnje i ponude i prije svega mi moramo nešto dalekosežnije vidjeti od naših privrednika koji su prije svega orijentisani na svoj lični profit, odnosno dobit, naravno čast izuzecima, prije svega tu kao što sam pomenuo i prije, mislim na ove međunarodne investitore koji su svjesni dugoročnih posljedica odluka koje sada donosimo. Ono što vidim je da je neophodna konstantna komunikacija i edukacija naših turističkih privrednika kojima prije svega sada već kroz te neke online sastanke, a prije i kroz direktne, objašnjavamo šta to znači održivost i na koji način moramo planirati naš razvoj turizma u našoj opštini. Šta je to što nama olakšava upravljanje destinacijom? Pa prije svega tu su neke čak i represivne mjere koje se moraju primjenjivati s vremena na vrijeme, ali isto tako imamo i neke negativne aspekte. Naravno, tu su kadrovska, finansijska, iskustvena spremnost same DMO, odnosno turističke organizacije. Saglasan sam sa gospođom Pušić-Srpak da nije isključivo finansijski moment ključan za pravilan razvoj destinacije. Saglasan sam da zaista trebamo na najbolji mogući način iskoristiti ta sredstva. Prije svega, konstantna komunikacija sa turističkom privredom, jer ipak mi kao destinacijska menadžment organizacija vidimo dalje od njih i moramo ih usmjeravati u pravom pravcu i u kojem se treba razvijati. Međutim, opet kažem, pritisak tržišta postoji, želja za profitom je velika, naročito u ovom periodu, i vjerujem da ćemo mi morati imati tu neku, da kažem, pomiriteljsku ulogu između tržišta i prije svega ponude, kako bi mogli da prije svega neke negativne efekte koji će se definitivno javiti nakon COVID-a, da ih ublažimo. Svakako dugoročno planiranje je neophodno, konstantna komunikacija sa turističkom privredom, mjerenje indikatora uspješnosti i naravno je neophodno. Mi to i radimo u turističkoj organizaciji kroz naše prije svega ankete sa turistima, ankete lokalnog stanovništva, ali isto i kroz brojna druga istraživanja, i konstantan monitoring destinacije je neophodan, sprovođenje određenih korektivnih aktivnosti, ali naravno za sve to je potrebna i politička volja koja trenutno kod nas definitivno postoji u našoj opštini i gdje imamo prije svega mi iz lokalne samouprave jedan glas koji se prije svega poštuje i prije svega šaljemo jedne te iste poruke ka našoj privredi, ka našem stanovništvu, i vjerujem da u tom pravcu treba nastaviti. Privreda nas prati uz određene naravno, postoje određene situacije kada i oni odskaču od toga, međutim, jako je važno da imamo i to susretno planiranje koje praktikujemo i konstantnu komunikaciju sa njima, tako da kroz neke zajedničke aktivnosti možemo definisati i dalje pravce razvoja i eventualno preduzimati neke korektivne mjere kada se ukaže da je to potrebno.
Hvala vam puno. I evo, ja bi se za kraj okrenula, gospodine Stela, k vama. Znači, slična situacija što se tiče izloženosti turizmu, kao što smo čuli od gospodina Kukalja. Vi ste spomenuli da ste radili ovu studiju nosivog kapaciteta. Pretpostavljam da je to iniciralo neke mehanizme mjerenja utjecaja turizma koje će ostati. Kakva je situacija i koji su izazovi u stvari u upravljanju održivom destinacijom iz vaše perspektive?
Dakle, studija nosivih kapaciteta je upravo donijela ono što je nama trebalo, a to je i medijska eksponiranost koncepta održivog turizma, koju smo mi ne samo preko medija, nego je to poslano i svim lokalnim samoupravama i jasno je naznačeno: dragi moji, ovo su vam limiti, kad ih pređete vi ste gotovi i morate nešto poduzeti ako želite. I to smo u suradnji sa županijom, koja nas je podržala, sa županom, napravili dosta dobro. Međutim, neću reći da je sad palo u vodu kada je došla kriza, ali je stvarno sad sve to teže je puno uvjeravati ljude i pričati o održivom razvoju u ovoj situaciji. I onda smo se okrenuli drugoj taktici i radimo na proizvodima održivog turizma, odnosno post-covid proizvodima i covid proizvodima koji su vezani za održivi turizam, a oni će se nastaviti i u novoj normalnoj situaciji. Dakle, to je ono što mi možemo sad napraviti i to je ono na čemu radimo. Kao što ste sami rekli, instrumenti, indikatori mjerenja, oni sigurno idu dalje i sa relevantnim institucijama smo u kontaktu da napravimo ne samo daljnja istraživanja, nego jednu vrstu brainstorminga sa najvećim, najznačajnijim znanstvenicima i ljudima iz sektora, upravo kako i na koji način implementirati ovu studiju na način koja poboljšanja konkretno bi se trebala napraviti da krenemo što kvalitetnije i brže prema održivom razvoju. Ali, kao što sam rekao, kao što je rekla kolegica Rujana i kolega iz Crne Gore, dakle, problemi nisu u financijama, problemi su u zakonodavstvu. Dakle, nas konkretno kao turističku zajednicu ili naš plan, ne moram mene pitati kao turističku zajednicu, naš glavni plan razvoja turizma, on nije jedna od glavnih stvari koje se gledaju za prostorne planove. Dakle, to su velike stvari koje nama nedostaju u zakonodavstvu i mi nemamo poluge kao DMO da utječemo na neke zakonodavne stvari, niti da ih bar utječemo na to da ih predložimo. Dakle, to su stvari koje nama u zakonodavstvu trebaju, ako ćemo kvalitetno upravljati i ako ćemo zaista biti DMO u pravom smislu te riječi. A ja znam da i u Europi i u svijetu ništa nije bolja situacija, ali mislim da moramo krenuti u tome smjeru, jer kao što smo sad rekao, da situacija da ljudi gledaju kako će raditi ovo i ono, dakle moramo na neki način se odmaknuti od tog divljeg kapitalizma, kako da kažem, i jednostavno rađenja novih kapaciteta i hotelskih i ovoga bez reda. Dakle, moramo znati koji su nam limiti, ne zato da mi nekome nešto zabranjujemo, nego zato da lokalno stanovništvo uvijek ima prednost i mora živjeti u kvalitetnom okruženju. Ako mi vidimo da lokalno stanovništvo ne može producirati radnu snagu, a dolaze nam novi kapaciteti, ima li smisla da mi sa stranom radnom snagom opskrbljujemo naše kapacitete? Je li to naša politika? Neko mora donijeti tu odluku i presjeći. Sad govorim o hipotetskim situacijama, ali one su vrlo blizu realnih situacija u određenim destinacijama, ne toliko u mojoj, ali u određenim destinacijama u Hrvatskoj su sigurno takve. Da li mi želimo onda da nam ljudi iz Koreje ili Mađari ili Kinezi rade u hotelima? Ja nisam protiv stranaca, nisam ksenofob, volim sve ljude jednako. Međutim, da li oni mogu prezentirati naš turizam jednako kao i domaći ljudi i da li će domaći ljudi imati benefit od tog turizma? Dakle, to su pitanja koja se trebaju adresirati na način da se daju poluge upravljanja DMO-u. Dakle, zakonodavne poluge počevši od prostornih planova pa prema mogućnosti predlaganja i utjecaja na sve ove faktore. Eto, toliko ukratko.
Hvala vam puno. Mislim da ste otvorili jednu jako važnu temu u turizmu koja nekako svih ovih godina turističkog razvoja, govorim iz perspektive Hrvatske koju naravno najbolje poznam, a to je prostorno planiranje koje nekako kao da su se turističko planiranje i prostorno planiranje kretali svaki svojom nekom paralelnom, ali svaki svojom putanjem. I da je definitivno došlo do točke kada se i kroz prostorno planiranje, ali puno drugih tema, akutnih tema će se morati početi adresirati upravo zbog te agresivnosti turizma i mjesta do kojeg smo došli danas. Evo, mi smo u stvari iskoristili naše vrijeme za ovaj panel. Imamo još nešto malo vremena, možda 10-ak minuta za pitanja i odgovore, odnosno za našu Q&A dio panela, pa ne znam da li su ova pitanja namijenjena nama ili u stvari su to pitanja još od prezentacija. Koliko ja vidim, to su sve pitanja od prezentacija.
Neda, u pravu ste, to su sva pitanja od prezentacija. Da. A sada možemo potaknuti naše prisutne da naravno podijele pitanja s nama.
Evo, ako netko iz publike znači ima pitanja i za naše paneliste, mislim da je ovo jedinstvena prilika u stvari da se crpe iskustva iz ove mikroregije, te šire mediteranske regije, ali koja se nosi sa puno istih problema. Kao što smo rekli, to je najsaturiranija turistička regija svijeta i izrazito ovisna o turizmu. Martina, pretpostavljam vi isto vidite pitanja, je li tako?
Je, vidim, evo za sada nema još nijedno pitanje, ali vjerujem da će sada početi, prisutnih je 104, imamo 104 ovdje prisutna, vjerujem da će sada početi pitanja. Netko tko želi na engleskom također može, tu je naša simultana prevoditeljica, tako da može i na engleskom se napraviti.
Evo, dok možda još pričekamo koju minutu, ono što je očito proizašlo iz ove današnje diskusije je da post-covid razdoblje, možda ne znam koliko je to, ali to post-covid razdoblje će sigurno u kratkom roku biti 2 koraka nazad. Odnosno, u prvi plan će doći ekonomska održivost, da tako kažem, a ne ova druga 2 aspekta. Međutim, ove teme koje smo otvorili, koje se sa cijelim webinarom, a i diskusijom s našim panelistima otvaraju, su u biti dugoročne teme. Teme za puno duži rok. Pri čemu turizam je izuzetno agresivna djelatnost i evo iz perspektive nekoga kao što sam ja, koja cijeli život radim u turizmu, to je već dosta dugi radni vijek, na kraju stvari shvatiš koliko je to agresivan sektor sa jako puno potencijala da učini dobro u svijetu, a s druge strane je vrlo agresivan, posebno na prostor, posebno na okoliš i da teme do kojih smo mi danas u ovoj regiji došli, nakon tih 50 godina uzastopnog rasta, sad stvarno već ima jako malo vremena, možda i premalo, ali malo vremena da se uhvatimo u koštac sa puno odgovornijim, boljim, dugoročnijim upravljanjem turizmom. Koliko ja vidim, nekako još uvijek smo na ovih 6 pitanja, pretpostavljam da nema novih pitanja za paneliste. Evo jedno.
Izvinjavam se, ja bih samo da vas pozdravim jer zaista moram ići.
Dobro, pa mislim da smo, ja ne vidim u stvari...
Evo ima jedno pitanje, Neda.
Recite, jel ga
naša kolegica Renata je postavila.
Aha, samo malo. Can tourism spearhead a drive to sustainability or to what extent is it dependent on the broader sustainability policies? Znači, da li turizam može biti predvodnik održivosti ili u kojoj mjeri je on u stvari ovisan o širim politikama održivosti, širim politikama koje pokušavaju utjecati na održivost. Da li je turizam predvodnik? Da li bi neko volontirao?
Evo, pokušat ću, jer Renata je dobra koleginica, neće zamjeriti ako nešto krivo kažem. Pa ne, gledajte, u svakom slučaju turizam je dio miksa gospodarskog u svakoj sredini. Nije on onako, da kažem, osama nekakva, neki osamljeni otok u tom kontekstu i mislim da će turizam uvijek morati biti i svakako nekakav razvoj će se u smislu održivosti odraziti i na generalno razumijevanje, na opštu situaciju, na kako se vidi iz perspektive svih tih različitih dionika. Na kraju krajeva s koje polazne točke idemo, jer znamo, evo, neke destinacije su sa problemima previše turizma napravile možda i neku štetu u prošlosti, sad je vrlo teško se vratiti u neku drugu priču, jer tu smo već ušli u neku ulicu koja na kraju krajeva daje nekakvu ili davala je neku ugodnost, a sad idemo prema nazad, znači rekli ste korak nazad, a to znamo i u ekonomskom smislu boli. Tako da, ali u svakom slučaju ja mislim da u mnogim sredinama, pogotovo ako govorim sad iz gledišta Slovenije, koje su se opredijelile za ovu održivost, koji su u nekakvom ambijentu rurala, da one mogu i jesu na kraju krajeva drajveri tog budućeg razvoja koji je u kontekstu održivosti. Toliko.
Očito ovisi o destinacijskom miksu. Destinacije koje su ovisne o turizmu, a tako je puno. specijalno na obali, očito turizam mora preuzeti tu predvodničku liniju, a tamo gdje je miks možda zdraviji, ako mogu reći,
tako je.
Onda je to druga pozicija.
I još nešto, ja bih rekao tamo gdje u destinaciji stvarno ima ljudi koji su ovisni od te destinacije, ne samo o turizmu, jer tamo žive 100-tinjak godina, njihovi preci su tamo, drugačije gleda na tu filozofiju. Evo, rekao je sad Joško lijepo, kolega Stela, ja se slažem, ja hoću kad odem na kraju krajeva na kavu porazgovarati sa nekim koji će mi ponuditi njegov pršut, njegov vino, kako je, na koji način to proizveo, kako živi na kraju krajeva, jer ono mi je samo nekakva točka na i, a interakcija, ovo je ono što po meni ostavlja ljudima i nekakav pečat i zbog toga se vraćamo na kraju krajeva. Toliko godina na destinacije koje su i kod vas vrhunske i da kažem nema zamjerki, ali treba naći uvijek nešto za sebe, svak će naći na kraju krajeva. Tako da evo.
Pa evo, onda na tom optimističkom tonu, Hrvatska stvarno ima lojalne goste. Evo, ja bi onda sa tom nekom optimističkom crtom i završila panel. Zahvalila vam se svima na sudjelovanju. Nadam se da je ovo bilo zanimljivo i poticajno i za naše sudionike webinara. I evo, Martina, prenosim riječ vama da možda uključite webinar.
So I'll just summarize. I hope this was really interesting for you as it was for me. The presentations were very topic oriented and offer some great guidelines and tools for recovery strategy. We also heard from our regional colleagues who shared their thoughts and experience during the COVID times. It was a wonderful opportunity for all of us to broaden our horizons and communicate with one another. So this communication was hopefully will continue as we collaborate in the future on improving the tourism sectors for the benefit of the world. There's a Travel Foundation here, Institute of Tourism, Euromonitor. We are all here to help the destinations to recover and to successfully achieve sustainability. A big thank you to all our esteemed presenters, panelists, and thank you all. And have a nice day and the rest of the weekend, and of course, successfully year ahead. So,
thank you.
Hvala.
Hvala, Bog.
Bog, doviđenja.
Doviđenja.
Sve najbolje.
Sve najbolje.
Thank you.